the lighthouse that guided lost dreams. There was once, on the farthest edge of a quiet coastline, a lighthouse that appeared on no ordinary map. Ships rarely searched for it. Sailors almost never spoke its name. Even the seabirds seemed to circle around its lonely cliffs with a kind of gentle respect, as though they understood that this place belonged to slower things. To tides. To stars. To forgotten wishes. And perhaps most of all, to dreams that had somehow wandered away from those who needed them. If you had happened to walk that coastline on an evening when the mist drifted low across the sea, you might have noticed something unusual. The fog did not simply roll across the rocks. It curled. It lingered. It shimmered faintly beneath the moonlight, carrying tiny glimmers that looked almost like floating silver seeds. The old villagers in distant harbors called them dream lights. Most people never noticed them. Those who did usually smiled without knowing why. And by morning, they had forgotten they had ever seen them. The lighthouse stood alone atop weathered cliffs of pale gray stone that had watched countless tides arrive and depart with patient rhythm. Its round tower was built from smooth blocks of sea-worn granite, each one carrying tiny veins of white quartz that sparkled whenever sunlight touched them. The lantern room rested beneath a copper roof that had turned soft shades of green after many years beside the ocean. Below the tower sat a small keeper's cottage. Its windows glowed with warm amber light each evening. Blue shutters framed every window. White climbing roses wandered lazily across the stone walls. A narrow garden overlooked the sea, where lavender, rosemary, and tiny white daisies swayed together whenever the breeze arrived from distant waters. Nothing ever seemed hurried here. Even the waves approached slowly. They folded themselves onto the shore one quiet breath at a time, then slipped gently back into the waiting sea. The lighthouse had only one keeper. Her name had long since become unimportant. Travelers who occasionally caught sight of the cottage simply called her the lantern keeper. She never corrected them. Every morning she rose before sunrise. Not because she had to, but because dawn deserved company. She opened every window to welcome the salt air. She swept the wooden floors until they gleamed softly in the growing light. She polished the brass lanterns that hung inside the tower staircase. She filled a small kettle with fresh rainwater collected from smooth copper barrels outside the cottage. Soon the comforting scent of warm chamomile tea drifted through every room. It mixed with beeswax candles, old cedar shelves, fresh bread, lavender drying from ceiling beams, and the unmistakable fragrance of the sea itself. Every object inside the cottage seemed to have settled exactly where it wished to spend its life. Nothing was crowded. Nothing was forgotten. A knitted blanket rested beside a rocking chair facing the largest window. Tiny glass bottles filled with smooth shells lined the shelves. Bundles of herbs hung upside down near the fireplace. An old wooden clock ticked with slow certainty. Each sound belonged. Each silence belonged too. After breakfast, the lantern keeper climbed the spiral staircase. The lighthouse steps had become polished over countless years. Each carried the gentle shine left behind by careful footsteps. As she climbed, narrow windows revealed little slices of the ocean. Sometimes bright blue beneath summer skies. Sometimes silver beneath rain. Sometimes wrapped entirely in pearl-colored mist. Every day looked different. Every day felt welcome. At the top waited the great lantern. Its crystal glass curved outward like a giant dewdrop. The polished brass reflected soft circles of morning sunlight across the floor. Most visitors would have assumed the lantern burned ordinary light. It did not. Its glow came from something much quieter. Each evening, after darkness settled across the sea, tiny drifting dreams arrived from every direction. Some floated across moonlit waves. Others descended gently through clouds. Some arrived hidden inside raindrops. Others rested briefly upon the wings of white owls before continuing their journey alone. The lantern keeper greeted everyone. She never hurried them. She never asked where they had come from. She simply opened the lantern chamber. One by one, the dreams drifted inside. The light grew warmer, brighter, kinder. No flame ever burned there. only dreams finding their way home. No one truly knew why dreams became lost. Perhaps someone stayed awake worrying too long. Perhaps a child forgot the ending of a beautiful adventure. Perhaps an old memory had wandered farther than expected. Dreams were delicate travelers. Sometimes they simply needed a little guidance. The lighthouse gave them that. Nothing more. Nothing less. By afternoon, seabirds often gathered on the cliffs. Puffins tucked their bright beaks beneath their wings. Gulls floated effortlessly upon the sea breeze. Cormorants stretched their feathers toward the fading sunlight. Far below, tide pools reflected tiny pieces of the sky. Sea stars rested among smooth stones. Anemones opened like underwater flowers. Little crabs wandered patiently over sand that sparkled with broken shells. The lantern keeper visited the cliffs each evening carrying a small woven basket. Inside rested crumbs of fresh bread, a handful of oats, sometimes sunflower seeds. The birds had long since stopped fearing her. One robin often landed beside her boots before breakfast. A pair of wrens nested beneath the cottage roof every spring. Even shy rabbits occasionally emerged from the tall grass near sunset. The entire cliff seemed to breathe together. Wind, grass, sea, stone. Everything moved in slow harmony. As daylight softened into evening, clouds often painted themselves with gentle shades of peach, lavender, and pale gold. The sea reflected every color without choosing a favorite. The lantern keeper carried her teacup to a weathered wooden bench overlooking the water. She never rushed through her tea. Steam drifted upward like tiny wandering clouds. Sometimes she watched dolphins far beyond the cliffs. Sometimes only waves. Sometimes nothing at all. Nothing, she believed, could be wonderfully peaceful. Tonight, however, something felt slightly different. Not alarming. Not unusual. Only quieter. The breeze had become softer than usual. The gulls called less often. Even the waves seemed to pause between gentle breaths. The lantern keeper noticed a single silver light floating across the water. Normally the drifting dreams arrived after darkness. This one had appeared while the last sunlight still lingered. It moved carefully, almost shyly. It hovered just above the waves before rising toward the cliffs. She stood without speaking. The tiny light circled once around the garden. It brushed lightly against blooming lavender. The flowers released their fragrance into the cool evening air. Then it drifted toward the lighthouse tower. Instead of entering the lantern room, it stopped, hovering quietly outside one small window. Waiting. The lantern keeper smiled. "You're early," she whispered. The silver light shimmered. Not brighter, only warmer, as though it had heard, as though it had traveled a very long way. She slowly opened the window. The little dream floated inside. Instead of rising toward the great lantern, it settled gently upon the wooden windowsill. There it rested, perfectly still. The lantern keeper had never seen a dream pause like this before. Most drifted eagerly toward the lantern's welcoming glow. This one simply gazed out toward the sea, as if waiting for someone else. Outside, the first stars appeared one by one. Each reflected softly upon the calm water below. The lighthouse lantern awakened with its familiar golden radiance. Across the quiet ocean, its comforting beam began its slow, endless circle, sweeping over waves, across sleeping islands, beyond distant harbors, into the waiting night. Far away, unseen by anyone awake, countless wandering dreams quietly turned toward that faithful light. One after another, they began their gentle journey home. And upon the windowsill, the tiny silver dream continued waiting, patiently, hopefully, as though tonight's story had only just begun. The little silver dream remained upon the windowsill long after the first stars had awakened above the sea. Outside, the lighthouse lantern continued its patient turning. Its golden beam glided across calm water, brushed the tops of distant waves, and disappeared into the gentle folds of evening mist before returning again in its slow and faithful circle. Inside the lantern room, everything rested in quiet harmony. The polished brass reflected warm circles of light. The curved crystal windows shimmered with tiny droplets of sea mist that had gathered during the cool evening. The old wooden floor carried the comforting scent of cedar and beeswax, softened by years of careful footsteps. The lantern keeper waited without speaking. She had learned long ago that dreams, much like birds, flowers, and tides, should never be hurried. Some arrived with joyful certainty. Others wandered carefully, unsure if they had truly found the place they were seeking. This little dream seemed to belong to the second kind. It glowed no brighter than a firefly, yet its silver light held a remarkable gentleness. Whenever the lighthouse beams swept past the window, tiny colors shimmered within it. Hints of pale blue, soft lavender, moonlit pearl, like reflections dancing inside a seashell. At last, after many quiet moments, the dream lifted from the windowsill. It floated only a few inches before pausing once again. The lantern keeper smiled. "You may take all the time you need." The dream drifted forward. Slowly, almost thoughtfully. It circled the lantern once, as though greeting an old friend. The great crystal lamp answered with a warm glow that brightened just enough to welcome its visitor. No sound filled the room, yet somehow the greeting felt complete. Then the little dream settled gently inside the heart of the lantern. The golden light deepened. Its warmth spread through every piece of polished brass. Soft reflections danced across the ceiling. Outside, the ocean seemed to brighten for only a single peaceful breath. Far beyond the cliffs, several drifting dream lights quietly changed direction. They had found their guide. The lantern keeper closed the lantern's glass door with practiced care. Every evening she performed the same small ritual, not from habit alone, but from gratitude. She rested one hand upon the brass frame, closed her eyes, and listened. Some people believed silence meant nothing was happening. Here, silence was wonderfully full. It carried the breathing of the sea, the whisper of distant wind, the quiet settling of old wood, the faint ticking of cooling metal, the soft pulse of dreams finding one another in the lantern's welcoming glow. It was enough. More than enough. Satisfied that the light would shine through the night, she began her slow walk down the spiral staircase. Each step creaked gently beneath her slippers. The sound was familiar, comforting, like the pages of a favorite book being turned one at a time. Halfway down the tower stood a small oak door. Most visitors, if there had ever been any, might have assumed it led to a storage room. Instead, it opened into one of the quietest places in the lighthouse. The Dream Library. It was not a library of books. At least, not entirely. Shelves lined every wall from floor to ceiling. They curved gently with the round shape of the tower. Upon those shelves rested hundreds of tiny glass jars. Each jar was no larger than a teacup. Each held a single glowing light. Some shone like soft amber. Others glimmered pale green. Many sparkled silver. A few carried warm shades of rose or blue. Every jar contained a dream that had safely returned home. Not forever. Only until it was ready to travel again. The lantern keeper believed that dreams enjoyed resting just as people did. Some needed only one quiet night. Others preferred a week beside the sea. A few lingered through changing seasons. No one knew exactly why. She had stopped asking many years ago. Instead, she simply cared for them. The room itself always smelled faintly of cedar shelves, dried lavender, polished glass, and warm candle wax. Above, a round skylight revealed the evening sky. Moonlight filtered down in soft silver ribbons. It mingled with the gentle glow of resting dreams until the entire room looked like a tiny piece of the night sky brought indoors. The lantern keeper carried a feather duster woven from the soft white feathers naturally shed by seabirds. She brushed each shelf with delicate care. Dust was rare here. Still, every jar deserved attention. As she worked, she quietly greeted them. "Good evening. I'm glad you've rested well. The stars are beautiful tonight." She never expected replies. Yet somehow the room always seemed a little brighter after she spoke. Near the center of the library stood a sturdy wooden table. Its surface had grown smooth through many years of use. There rested a large leather journal. Its pages were thick and cream-colored. The corners had softened with age. She opened it carefully. Every page contained only a few lines. Never more. She believed memories should be light enough to carry. Tonight she dipped her pen into dark blue ink and wrote. One dream arrived before sunset. She paused. Outside. Waves sighed gently against the cliffs. Then she added another line. It waited by the window before choosing the lantern. She smiled. Some journeys require patience. Nothing else needed saying. She gently closed the journal. A breeze drifted through the small round window. It carried cool salt air and the sweet fragrance of night-blooming jasmine climbing outside the cottage walls. Somewhere nearby, an owl called once. Then all became peaceful again. The lantern keeper lit 3 small candles inside the library. Not because the room needed more light. The dreams themselves glowed brightly enough. She simply liked the warmth candles offered. Their gentle flickering made the glass jars sparkle like tiny constellations. The shelves became a quiet sky of their own. She settled into a rocking chair beside the window. A knitted blanket rested across her knees. Steam rose from a fresh cup of chamomile tea. Outside, clouds drifted slowly across the moon. For a long while she simply watched the lights resting peacefully upon their shelves. One tiny blue dream floated lazily from its jar. It circled above the table before drifting back inside. Another gave a sleepy shimmer, almost like a yawn. A silver one brightened for a heartbeat as though remembering a happy afternoon. Nothing happened quickly. Everything unfolded with gentle certainty. Time moved differently here. Eventually, the lantern keeper noticed something curious. One shelf near the highest corner remained empty. It had been empty for several evenings now. The polished oak still gleamed softly in the candlelight. Its little brass nameplate reflected the stars. She climbed a short ladder and gently touched the vacant space. There was no dust, only quiet anticipation. She could not remember which dream had rested there last. Dreams rarely stayed in exactly the same place. Yet somehow this empty shelf felt as though it were waiting. Not lonely, not forgotten, simply prepared. Like an empty chair beside a fireplace, or an untouched teacup waiting for a guest who had not yet arrived. She smiled to herself. Perhaps tomorrow. The words drifted into the peaceful room. The jars answered with tiny glimmers. Outside, the lighthouse beam continued its endless circle across the sleeping sea. Far beyond the horizon, more wandering dreams slowly discovered its warm invitation. Some floated through moonlit clouds. Some rode gentle currents of mist. Others followed quiet flocks of migrating birds beneath the stars. None of them hurried. There was no need. The lighthouse would be waiting. It always was. As midnight quietly settled over the coast, the lantern keeper returned the journal to its place upon the table. She extinguished 2 of the candles, leaving one to burn beside the shelves until dawn. Its golden flame never flickered wildly. Only softly, as though careful not to disturb the sleeping dreams. Before leaving, she looked once more toward the empty shelf. For the briefest moment, she thought she saw the faintest shimmer there. Not bright enough to become a light. Not solid enough to become a dream. Only the smallest promise that something gentle was already making its way across the sea. She closed the oak door with a quiet click. The library settled into peaceful stillness. Above, the lighthouse lantern continued to shine. Below, the waves whispered against ancient stone. And somewhere beyond the silver horizon, another forgotten dream had just begun to notice a warm golden light patiently turning beneath the stars. Its journey had only just begun. Long before the first colors of dawn touched the horizon, the lighthouse still shone across the quiet sea. Its golden beam moved with the same gentle rhythm it had followed for generations. Sweep. Pause. Sweep again. Each turn carried its warm glow farther into the sleeping world, where drifting dreams continued their peaceful journeys. The stars above seemed in no hurry to leave. They lingered over the ocean like tiny lanterns of their own, mirrored upon the calm water below. The lantern keeper stood beside the highest window, wrapped in a woolen shawl the color of soft cream. She held a warm cup of chamomile tea between her hands. The cup warmed her fingers while the cool sea breeze brushed lightly against her face. There was something comforting about the hour before sunrise. The world felt as though it were breathing quietly in its sleep. The waves spoke in hushed whispers against the rocks. The wind wandered lazily through the lavender garden below. Even the gulls remained tucked beneath their wings upon the cliffs. The morning had not yet asked anyone to hurry. She watched as the final stars slowly faded into a sky that softened from deep navy to gentle indigo. Soon a ribbon of pale silver appeared along the distant horizon. Then came the faintest blush of rose. The sea welcomed each new color without a ripple of complaint. It simply reflected whatever the sky wished to become. The lantern keeper smiled. Every sunrise was different. Every one felt familiar. When the lantern's work for the night had ended, its golden light slowly grew softer. Not dimmer, simply quieter. Like someone lowering their voice at the end of a peaceful conversation. She carefully polished the crystal glass one final time before closing the lantern for the morning. As always, she whispered a small thank you. Not because anyone expected it, but because gratitude made even ordinary mornings feel extraordinary. Descending the spiral staircase, she noticed the comforting scent of fresh bread waiting below. The dough she had prepared the evening before had risen beautifully overnight. She placed it inside the old stone oven, where dry cedar logs crackled with slow, steady warmth. Soon the cottage filled with the rich aroma of baking bread. It mingled with honey, rosemary, warm butter, and the clean fragrance of rainwater simmering gently in the kettle. Outside, tiny beads of dew rested upon every blade of grass. The lavender blossoms carried crystal droplets that sparkled like little stars reluctant to disappear. Spiders had woven delicate webs between rosemary stems during the night. Each thread caught the growing light until the garden looked draped in silver lace. A robin landed upon the garden fence. It tilted its head toward the cottage. The lantern keeper opened the window. "Good morning," the robin answered with a cheerful song. Soon another joined. Then another. Within moments the quiet cliffs filled with gentle birdsong, each melody blending softly with the distant rhythm of the waves. She carried a small basket of oats and sunflower seeds into the garden. The birds gathered without fear. A pair of wrens fluttered beneath the cottage roof. Finches hopped through the herbs. Even a shy rabbit emerged from the tall grasses to nibble clover near the garden path. The morning unfolded slowly, exactly as mornings should. When breakfast had finished and the dishes were washed, the lantern keeper reached for a long wooden telescope that rested beside the cottage door. It had belonged to an earlier keeper many years ago. The polished brass had grown warm with age. The smooth oak handle fit comfortably in her hands. Each morning she climbed to a rocky overlook above the lighthouse. From there she could see the endless meeting place of sea and sky. Sometimes dolphins traveled across the distant water. Sometimes fishing boats appeared as tiny specks near the horizon. Sometimes there was only open ocean stretching farther than imagination could follow. Today, something floated within the morning mist. It was almost impossible to see at first. Only the faint outline of a small boat. No sails. No oars moving. No wake behind it. It simply drifted. The lantern keeper raised the telescope. The mist slowly parted. The little boat came into view. It was beautifully made. Its hull was built from pale wood polished smooth by countless seasons. Tiny brass fittings gleamed softly. A small lantern hung from the bow, though unlit. Its glass shimmered with a pearly glow. There was no name painted upon the side. No flag. No fishing nets. No cargo. Most curious of all, there was no one aboard. The little vessel drifted as gently as a fallen leaf upon a quiet pond. The lantern keeper lowered the telescope. She was not surprised, only curious. The sea had always carried wonderful mysteries to the lighthouse. This seemed to be another. She watched patiently as the boat approached the narrow cove below the cliffs. The tide welcomed it with remarkable kindness. Each small wave seemed to guide it safely between the rocks, without a single bump or scrape. It came to rest beside the old wooden pier. The pier itself was small. Its weathered planks had silvered with age. Sea grasses swayed beneath its supports. Tiny mussels clung to the posts where the tide rose and fell each day. The lantern keeper walked slowly down the winding stone path. The air smelled wonderfully fresh. Salt, wet driftwood, sea moss, the sweetness of blooming clover. Above her, white clouds drifted lazily across an increasingly blue sky. The little boat waited exactly where the tide had left it. Its polished wood reflected soft circles of sunlight. She stepped onto the pier. The boards gave their familiar gentle creak beneath her feet. Not a sound came from the boat. No ropes tied it in place. Yet it remained perfectly still, as though it knew exactly where it belonged. The lantern keeper reached out and rested one hand upon its smooth wooden side. The wood felt warm, warmer than the morning air. She smiled. "Welcome," the sea answered with a quiet sigh. Inside the boat rested only three things: a neatly folded blanket woven from pale blue wool, a small cedar box secured with a tiny brass clasp, and a single white feather. The feather lay across the blanket so lightly that even the breeze did not carry it away. The lantern keeper picked it up with great care. It was softer than thistledown. Its delicate strands shimmered faintly whenever sunlight touched them. She had seen feathers like this only once before. Many years ago, when a flock of great white seabirds had circled the lighthouse beneath a sky filled with shooting stars. She tucked the feather gently into her basket for safekeeping. Next, she lifted the cedar box. It was surprisingly light. The polished wood released a pleasant fragrance of fresh cedar mixed with lavender. Tiny waves had carved faint swirling patterns into the grain over many seasons. She carried it to a weathered bench overlooking the sea. For a long moment she simply admired the craftsmanship. The brass clasp had been shaped into a tiny crescent moon. She opened it slowly. Inside rested nothing, or so it seemed. The box appeared empty, completely empty. Yet as she held it beneath the morning light, she noticed the faintest shimmer deep within its smooth interior, almost invisible, like sunlight reflected inside clear water. She tilted the box. Nothing rolled. Nothing shifted. Still, the shimmer remained. She closed the lid with a gentle smile. Not every gift announced itself immediately. Some preferred quiet introductions. Back at the cottage, she placed the cedar box upon the kitchen table beside a vase filled with fresh daisies. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, warming the polished wood until its grain glowed with rich golden color. The white feather rested beside it. Neither seemed ordinary. Neither seemed in any hurry to reveal its purpose. She brewed another pot of tea, this time blending chamomile with a touch of mint gathered from the garden. Steam curled upward in graceful ribbons. Outside, the little boat continued resting peacefully beside the pier. The tide neither carried it away nor pushed it farther ashore. It simply waited, as though its journey had paused exactly where it was meant to. That afternoon, while arranging freshly baked bread upon a cooling rack, the lantern keeper happened to glance toward the dream library door. For just a heartbeat, she thought she saw the empty shelf glowing ever so slightly through the narrow crack beneath the door. The light was delicate, barely noticeable, yet it matched the quiet shimmer hidden inside the cedar box. She looked from the box to the library door, then toward the little boat resting beyond the cottage window. 3 small mysteries, each arriving on the same peaceful morning. Outside, the breeze carried the scent of the sea through the open windows. Somewhere above the cliffs, a gull glided effortlessly upon the wind. The waves continued their endless conversation with the shore. And beneath the warm afternoon sun, the little boat rocked only once, as gently as though it had sighed in its sleep. The afternoon drifted gently toward evening. Outside the cottage windows, the sea breathed with its familiar rhythm, each wave arriving with patient grace before slipping quietly back into the wide blue water. Sunlight stretched across the ocean in long ribbons of gold that sparkled for a moment, and then softened into silver. The little boat remained beside the old pier. It rocked so gently that it almost seemed to be resting. The lantern keeper glanced toward it from time to time as she went about the peaceful work of her day. She folded freshly dried towels that carried the clean scent of sunshine and sea air. She watered the rosemary and thyme growing beside the stone path. She gathered a handful of lavender blossoms, tying them into small bundles with pale linen thread before hanging them beneath the porch roof to dry. Every task unfolded slowly. None felt hurried. The day itself seemed content to linger. Inside the cottage, the cedar box rested quietly upon the kitchen table. Warm sunlight slipped through the windows, illuminating its smooth grain. The tiny brass clasp, shaped like a crescent moon, reflected a gentle glimmer across the tabletop. The white feather lay beside it, perfectly still. Several times the lantern keeper walked past the table. Each time she noticed the same faint shimmer escaping from the narrow seam where the lid met the box. Not enough to brighten the room, only enough to invite another look. When the afternoon shadows had grown long and the kettle began its familiar whisper upon the stove, she carried a fresh cup of chamomile tea to the table. Steam rose in delicate curls. The fragrance of honey mingled with the scent of cedar wood. She settled into her favorite chair and rested both hands around the warm cup. For a while she did nothing at all. She simply watched the light upon the box. Sometimes the most interesting things revealed themselves only after a little quiet company. The shimmer appeared once more. Soft, patient, almost like moonlight reflected beneath clear water. She smiled. "I think you're ready." "Very." Carefully, she lifted the lid. Again, the box appeared empty. Its cedar interior had been polished until it gleamed like satin. No jewel rested inside. No letter. No shell. No tiny keepsake from some forgotten traveler. Only the quiet shimmer remained. The lantern keeper leaned a little closer. As she did, she noticed something she had not seen before. The light was moving. Not quickly. Not even enough to be called a dance. It drifted lazily through the empty space inside the box, curling in slow circles like morning mist winding through a peaceful valley. She watched without blinking. The shimmering threads gathered together, separated, then gathered again. Little by little, they began forming tiny points of light. One, then another, then another. Within moments, dozens of miniature stars floated inside the cedar box, each no larger than a grain of rice, each glowing with the gentlest silver light imaginable. The lantern keeper's eyes softened. "Well," she whispered, "you're full after all." The tiny stars continued their slow drifting. They neither touched the sides of the box nor rose into the air. Instead, they circled one another with remarkable calm, as though each already knew exactly where it belonged. Watching them felt strangely comforting, almost familiar. The room itself seemed quieter. Even the old clock upon the mantel softened its ticking. Outside, the wind settled among the lavender blossoms. Somewhere far below, waves whispered against the rocks. Everything seemed to lean closer to the little cedar box. The lantern keeper reached out one finger. She did not touch the lights. She merely held her hand above them. Immediately, one tiny star floated upward. It hovered just beneath her fingertip. Its glow was warm, not hot, simply pleasant, like the last gentle rays of sunshine lingering on a cool evening. The little star circled her finger once before returning to its companions. She laughed softly. It was the quiet kind of laughter that belonged in peaceful places, no louder than falling leaves. She closed the lid. The shimmering glow remained visible through the narrow seams of the box. Whatever rested inside seemed perfectly content. Tea finished, she carried the cedar box upstairs to the dream library. The familiar oak door opened with its gentle creak. Moonlight had not yet reached the skylight. so the room glowed only with the peaceful light resting inside hundreds of tiny glass jars. Silver, amber, blue, rose, green. Each dream slumbered peacefully within its own crystal home. The lantern keeper walked slowly between the shelves. The cedar box felt surprisingly light in her hands, as though it wished to be carried. She reached the highest shelf, the one that had remained empty. The polished oak still waited beneath its little brass nameplate. Without quite knowing why, she placed the cedar box there. The moment it touched the wood, the room changed. Not dramatically. Nothing flashed. Nothing burst into brilliance. Instead, every glowing jar brightened together by the smallest amount. It was as though hundreds of sleeping dreams had quietly smiled. The empty shelf no longer felt empty. It felt complete. A soft silver thread emerged from the cedar box. It drifted lazily upward before disappearing into the round skylight above. The lantern keeper followed it with her eyes. Outside, the evening sky was beginning to deepen toward indigo. The very first star of the night had appeared. Then another. Then another. She stood perfectly still. Far above the lighthouse, one star shimmered just a little brighter than the rest. Its light seemed to answer the thread rising from the cedar box. The silver ribbon slowly faded. The star continued shining. Everything became peaceful once more. The lantern keeper placed the white feather beside the box upon the shelf. It rested there as lightly as fresh snow. Together, they looked as though they had always belonged. She opened her leather journal. Dipping her pen into blue ink, she wrote carefully. A cedar box arrived with the morning tide. She paused. Outside, a breeze stirred through the tower windows. Then she added, inside rested quiet stars. Another pause. A thoughtful smile. Some gifts are empty only until we learn how to see them. She closed the journal gently. As evening settled across the coast, she descended to prepare the lighthouse lantern for another peaceful night. She polished the great crystal glass until it reflected the first moonlight. She checked each brass fitting. She opened the lantern room windows to welcome the cool sea breeze. The fragrance of salt, rain-damp stone, and blooming jasmine drifted inside. One by one, the first wandering dreams began appearing above the ocean. Some floated through strands of pearl-colored mist. Others drifted just above the waves, leaving no ripple behind. A few arrived from high among the stars, descending so slowly that they looked like delicate snowflakes made of light. The lighthouse welcomed them all. Its golden glow grew warmer with every new arrival. Far below, the mysterious little boat remained at the pier. Moonlight painted silver lines across its polished hull. Its lantern, still unlit, reflected the stars overhead. For just a moment, the lantern keeper thought she saw one tiny silver light rise from the boat. It floated upward, crossed the quiet garden, past the lavender swaying in the evening breeze, and disappeared through the dream library window. She did not follow. Some journeys were happiest when allowed to finish on their own. Instead, she stood beside the great lantern, watching its warm beams sweep across the peaceful sea. Behind her, hidden safely within the library, the cedar box rested upon its waiting shelf. Inside, countless tiny stars continued their slow, graceful dance. Beyond the cliffs, another dream had noticed the lighthouse. It turned gently toward the welcoming light. Without hurry, without fear, simply following the quiet promise that somewhere ahead, there would always be a place prepared to receive it. Morning arrived beneath a sky of gentle gray. The sunrise did not burst across the horizon with brilliant colors. Instead, it unfolded quietly behind layers of soft clouds, painting the sea in shades of pearl, silver, and pale blue. The lighthouse stood peacefully atop its weathered cliffs, wrapped in a veil of cool mist. Tiny droplets rested upon every stone. The white roses climbing the cottage walls wore sparkling beads of rain like delicate necklaces. Lavender bowed beneath the gentle weight of moisture, filling the air with an even sweeter fragrance than usual. The lantern keeper opened the front door. Cool air greeted her with the comforting scent of wet earth, salt water, and fresh pine carry from forests far inland. She drew a slow, contented breath. Rain was coming. Not a storm. Not the kind of rain that hurried across the world with loud winds and restless clouds. This would be a patient rain. A quiet rain. The kind that invited the whole coast to rest. She smiled. "Good morning." As if answering, a single raindrop landed softly upon the wooden railing of the porch. Then another. Soon the sky was releasing a steady curtain of tiny silver drops. The sound was wonderfully gentle. Rain tapped softly against the cottage roof. It whispered through rosemary bushes. It slipped from leaf to leaf before gathering into tiny streams that wandered through the garden paths. The sea welcomed every drop without complaint. Its surface became a tapestry of countless tiny circles, each one blooming and disappearing almost before the next appeared. The lantern keeper placed a copper kettle beneath the rain barrel's spout. Fresh rainwater always made the most comforting tea. While it filled, she watched the clouds drift slowly across the sky. They were not dark, only thoughtful, like old blankets spread across the heavens. Inside the cottage, a small fire crackled cheerfully in the stone hearth. Not because the day was cold, only because the warm glow made rainy mornings feel especially cozy. She placed slices of fresh bread into the oven to toast. Soon the comforting aroma of warm grain, melting butter, and honey filled every room. Steam curled lazily from her teacup. Outside, the rain continued its gentle song. Each window became a living painting. Tiny droplets raced one another down the glass. Some joined together into larger pearls before sliding quietly toward the wooden sill. Others remained where they landed, reflecting the soft light of morning. The lantern keeper carried her breakfast upstairs to the dream library. The room welcomed her with its familiar glow. Hundreds of resting dreams shimmered peacefully inside their glass jars. The cedar box remained upon its once empty shelf. Its tiny crescent clasp reflected both candlelight and the pale daylight filtering through the skylight. The white feather rested beside it, perfectly still. She paused before the shelf. Something had changed. Not the box itself. The air around it. Fine strands of silver light floated upward from the narrow seams of the cedar lid. They drifted lazily toward the skylight, where they dissolved into the rainy morning beyond. Each strand vanished the instant it touched the glass, almost like mist returning to the clouds. The lantern keeper watched for several peaceful minutes. The silver threads rose one after another, never hurried, never stopping, almost as though the box were quietly breathing. She sipped her tea. The warmth spread pleasantly through her hands. The rain continued tapping softly overhead. Suddenly, one tiny raindrop slipped through the slightly open skylight. It fell without sound. Instead of landing upon the floor, it drifted gently through the room like a floating crystal bead. Another followed. Then another. The lantern keeper looked upward. The opening in the skylight was far too small for ordinary rain to enter so gracefully. Yet these droplets floated as lightly as feathers. One settled upon the cedar box. The moment it touched the polished wood, the droplet shimmered with soft silver light. It did not soak into the cedar. Instead, it rested there like a tiny glass pearl. Another landed upon the white feather. The feather glowed faintly. Its delicate strands reflected dozens of tiny stars. The lantern keeper reached out carefully. She touched the glowing droplet with one fingertip. It felt wonderfully cool, like fresh spring water gathered from a mountain stream. As the droplet rolled across her skin, she noticed something remarkable. Within its crystal surface, tiny stars were reflected. Not the cloudy morning sky above, not the library around her, only stars. Countless little constellations twinkled inside that single drop of rain. She smiled with quiet wonder. "So," she whispered, "you remember the night?" The droplet sparkled once before slowly fading into clear water. The tiny stars disappeared. It slipped harmlessly onto the cedar shelf, where it evaporated almost immediately. Outside, the rain continued falling. Inside, more floating droplets drifted gently through the library. Each carried its own miniature sky. Some reflected crescent moons. Others held clusters of distant stars. One seemed to contain the faint silver ribbon of the Milky Way stretching from edge to edge. The lantern keeper did not try to collect them. She simply watched. Certain moments asked for nothing more. After a little while, the droplets began settling upon the glass jars. Every dream resting inside shimmered a little brighter. Soft amber lights became golden. Blue dreams deepened into sapphire. Silver dreams glowed with the quiet radiance of moonlit snow. The entire library seemed wrapped in peaceful starlight. Even though rain clouds covered the sky outside. The old leather journal rested upon the oak table. The lantern keeper opened it. She dipped her pen into blue ink and wrote slowly. Today the rain remembered the stars. She paused, listening to the steady music upon the roof. Then she added, perhaps every drop carries a little piece of the sky it once traveled through. She closed the journal with a satisfied smile. The words felt complete. By afternoon, the rain softened even further. The clouds grew lighter. Far beyond the cliffs, ribbons of mist drifted across the calm sea. The little boat remained tied to nothing, yet still resting peacefully beside the pier. Tiny droplets sparkled upon its polished wooden hull. Its pearl-glass lantern now held a single bead of rain. The bead reflected a tiny constellation before quietly slipping away. The lantern keeper walked to the porch beneath a wide umbrella woven from pale canvas. She carried a small basket of birdseed. Although many birds sheltered beneath the cottage roof, a few cheerful robins still ventured into the drizzle. They hopped happily across the damp garden paths, leaving tiny footprints that quickly disappeared beneath fresh rain. A rabbit peeked from beneath a rosemary bush. Its fur looked delightfully fluffy after the mist. The lantern keeper scattered a handful of oats. The little visitor twitched its nose appreciatively before beginning its peaceful breakfast. The world felt wonderfully unhurried. Rain had a way of slowing everything to its proper pace. As evening approached, the clouds began to part. Not all at once. Only enough to reveal one small opening above the western sea. Golden sunlight poured through that quiet window in the sky. It spread across the rain-dappled ocean like a long path of glowing silk. Every raindrop caught the light. The cliffs shimmered. The wet stones sparkled. The lighthouse windows glowed as though tiny stars had settled inside them. The lantern keeper climbed to the lantern room. She polished the crystal glass while the final drops of rain whispered across the roof. Soon twilight arrived. The clouds drifted gently apart. One by one, the evening stars appeared. Far below, puddles scattered across the garden reflected the heavens perfectly. It became almost impossible to tell where the sky ended and the earth began. The lighthouse awakened once more. Its golden beams swept slowly across the freshly washed sea. The air smelled wonderfully clean. Salt, wet stone, pine, lavender, fresh rain. And somewhere deep within the dream library, the cedar box released one last delicate silver thread. It rose through the skylight toward the first evening star. High above the clouds, something answered. Not with words, not with sound, only with the faintest shimmer, as though the stars themselves had remembered the lighthouse. Just as faithfully as the rain had remembered them. The rain had wandered on during the night. By morning, the sky had become wonderfully clear. The air felt fresh and cool, carrying the clean fragrance of washed stone, salt water, damp earth, and blooming lavender. Every leaf in the garden glistened beneath tiny pearls of dew that caught the early sunlight like scattered crystals. The sea stretched quietly toward the horizon. Its surface was almost perfectly smooth. Only the smallest ripples moved across the water, each one reflecting the pale gold of the rising sun. The lantern keeper opened every window of the cottage. Fresh air drifted through each room, stirring the linen curtains until they billowed gently like little white sails. The familiar scents of cedar shelves, warm beeswax, rosemary, and yesterday's rain mingled together, creating the comforting fragrance that made the lighthouse feel so wonderfully like home. She placed the kettle upon the stove. Soon the gentle hum of warming water joined the quiet chorus of the morning. A robin greeted the day from the garden fence. Farther away, a pair of gulls glided silently above the cliffs, letting the breeze carry them wherever it wished. Everything seemed perfectly balanced. Not too still, not too busy, just enough. After breakfast, the lantern keeper climbed the spiral staircase toward the dream library. Morning sunlight poured through the round skylight, painting bright circles across the polished wooden floor. The hundreds of tiny glass jars glowed softly as the daylight touched them. Their sleeping dreams seemed peaceful after another successful night beneath the lighthouse lantern. The cedar box rested quietly upon its special shelf. Its silver shimmer had become almost familiar now. Beside it, the white feather remained as light as ever, barely moving even when the morning breeze slipped through the slightly open skylight. The lantern keeper smiled. Then her eyes wandered toward the opposite side of the room. There, tucked between two tall bookshelves, stood something she had not noticed for quite some time. An old grandfather clock. It had always been there. Yet somehow it never seemed eager to be seen. Its tall case had been carved from dark walnut wood, polished so lovingly over the years that its surface reflected the soft morning light. Tiny carvings of stars, waves, shells, and curling clouds wound gently around its frame. Its brass pendulum shone like a drop of captured sunlight behind a crystal window. The clock's face was unlike any ordinary clock. Instead of numbers, 12 tiny mother-of-pearl stars circled its edge. Its hands were shaped like slender silver branches. Above them rested a small painted moon. Below, delicate waves curled across the dial. The lantern keeper walked over and rested one hand upon the smooth walnut. "Good morning." The clock answered with a single quiet sound. "Tick." She smiled. "I thought so." She opened the small door beneath the pendulum. Inside, everything appeared perfectly ordinary. The brass pendulum swung from side to side with slow, graceful certainty. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Each movement seemed to breathe rather than count. She listened carefully. Most clocks measured hours. Some measured minutes. A few measured seconds. This one measured something gentler. Moments. Not the kind that hurried people from one task to another, but the kind that invited them to notice. The warmth of a teacup. The fragrance of fresh bread. The sound of waves meeting the shore. The comfort of moonlight across quiet water. Every swing of the pendulum seemed to say, "Here. Now. Enough." The lantern keeper closed her eyes. For several peaceful minutes, she simply listened. The steady rhythm blended with the distant sea, with birdsong drifting through the windows, with the faint crackle of the fire downstairs. The entire lighthouse seemed to breathe together. Tick. The waves sighed. Tock. The wind answered. Tick. A dream shimmered softly inside its jar. Tock. A floorboard settled beneath years of patient service. Nothing competed. Everything belonged. Then something curious happened. The pendulum slowed. Only slightly. It did not stop. Instead, each swing became just a little wider. A little softer. As though making room for something. The silver thread rising from the cedar box brightened gently. It drifted across the library like a ribbon carried by an invisible breeze. Instead of floating upward toward the skylight, it curled toward the grandfather clock. The thread touched the polished brass pendulum. For one silent heartbeat, the pendulum glowed. Not brightly, only warmly. The walnut case released the faint scent of old cedar forests after rain. The painted stars upon the clock face shimmered. The tiny moon seemed almost to smile. Then the glow faded. The pendulum continued its steady journey. Tick. Tock. Nothing appeared different. Yet somehow everything felt a little more peaceful. The lantern keeper looked toward the cedar box. It rested exactly as before. She looked back at the clock. Its silver hands had hardly moved. She laughed quietly. "You've been keeping company with one another." The clock offered no reply beyond its faithful rhythm. She found that answer perfectly satisfying. Later that morning, She carried a soft cloth and polished the walnut case until every carved wave and star gleamed. She rubbed a little beeswax into the wood. Immediately, the grain deepened into warm shades of honey and chestnut. The room filled with the comforting fragrance of polished timber. She wound the clock with a small brass key kept in a nearby drawer. The key turned easily. Not because the clock required winding. It seemed capable of keeping time all by itself. The ritual simply pleased them both. When she finished, the clock offered another gentle tick, almost like a thank you. By afternoon, sunlight wandered lazily across the library floor. The bright circles shifted little by little, following the slow passage of the day. The lantern keeper sat beside the window with her knitting. Soft blue yarn slipped peacefully through her fingers. The needles clicked so quietly they sounded almost like distant raindrops. Every now and then she paused to listen. The clock, the sea, the dreams. Together they created a melody too gentle to ever become a song. Outside, the mysterious little boat remained at the pier. Its reflection floated upon the calm water as clearly as if another boat rested beneath the surface of the sea. The pearl lantern hanging from its bow caught the afternoon light. For a brief moment, it reflected a tiny silver beam toward the lighthouse. The beam slipped through the library window. It landed upon the face of the grandfather clock. One of the mother-of-pearl stars shimmered ever so softly. The lantern keeper noticed. She simply smiled and returned to her knitting. Some mysteries grew sweeter when left unexplained. As evening approached, the garden filled once more with the fragrance of blooming jasmine. The rosemary swayed gently. The lavender released its calming perfume into the cooling air. The first fireflies appeared among the grasses, glowing with tiny golden lights that echoed the dreams resting inside the tower. The lantern keeper climbed to the lantern room. She polished the great crystal lens until it sparkled against the deepening sky. Soon the first wandering dreams began arriving across the sea. The lighthouse welcomed them with its familiar golden embrace. Below, inside the dream library, the grandfather clock continued its patient work. Tick, tock, not measuring hours, not measuring days, only collecting the quiet moments that made a peaceful life feel wonderfully full. And somewhere beyond the horizon, where the sea gently kissed the evening sky, another forgotten dream slowed its journey for just a little while. Not because it was lost, but because it had learned that the gentlest paths were often the ones worth following. The day settled gently into evening. The last warmth of the afternoon lingered upon the sunlit stones surrounding the lighthouse, while long shadows stretched peacefully across the garden. Lavender blossoms swayed with slow grace in the cooling breeze, releasing their familiar fragrance into the salt-kissed air. Far below, the sea glowed with quiet shades of silver and blue. The little boat still rested beside the weathered pier. It had not drifted away with the tide. It had not moved closer to shore. It simply remained where the sea had softly placed it, as though the cove itself had invited the boat to stay a little longer. The lantern keeper carried a small wicker basket down the winding stone path. Inside rested a folded linen cloth, a warm loaf of fresh bread, a tiny jar of honey, a wedge of creamy cheese, and a polished teapot wrapped carefully in a knitted cover to keep it warm. She often enjoyed her evening tea beside the sea. The quiet company of the waves made every sip taste a little sweeter. She reached the old pier just as the first evening star appeared above the eastern horizon. The wooden planks still held a little warmth from the day's sunshine. She spread the linen cloth upon the end of the dock and poured herself a cup of fragrant chamomile blended with lemon balm gathered from the cottage garden. Steam drifted upward in soft white ribbons. The breeze carried the scent across the calm water. Somewhere nearby, a gentle splash broke the silence. A curious seal lifted its round head above the surface of the sea. Its dark eyes blinked slowly toward the lighthouse before it disappeared beneath the waves once again, leaving only widening circles upon the water. The lantern keeper smiled. "Good evening," the sea answered with another peaceful sigh. She finished her tea slowly. There was no reason to hurry. The moon had not yet climbed above the horizon, and twilight seemed content to linger. As she gathered her basket, something unusual caught her eye. A pale silver glow shimmered beneath the little boat. At first she thought it was simply the reflection of the evening star. But the light did not ripple with the water. Instead, it remained perfectly steady. She knelt at the edge of the dock. The sea was so clear that she could see smooth stones resting upon the sandy bottom several feet below. Tiny fish drifted lazily between ribbons of waving seagrass. The silver glow rested upon the sand. Curious. She reached for the long wooden boat hook leaning against one of the pier posts. Its smooth ash handle had served the lighthouse for many years. She gently lowered the hook into the water. The silver object rose easily, as though it had been waiting to be found. It was not heavy, only damp. As she lifted it onto the dock, droplets of seawater slipped quietly back into the ocean. The object was a rolled piece of parchment. Or at least, it appeared to be. Yet it felt unlike ordinary paper. Its surface shimmered faintly, almost like polished seashells beneath moonlight. The ribbon holding it closed had been woven from silver thread. It was dry, though it had rested beneath the sea. The lantern keeper untied the ribbon carefully. The parchment slowly unfurled across the wooden dock. At first, it appeared completely blank. She tilted it toward the fading light. Nothing. She smiled. You may be waiting for evening. She rolled it gently and carried it back toward the lighthouse. By the time she reached the garden gate, the moon had risen. It was nearly full. Its soft silver light spilled across the cliffs, touching every stone, every flower, every wave with quiet brightness. Inside the cottage, she placed the mysterious parchment upon the kitchen table. The room glowed warmly with beeswax candles, but nothing appeared upon its smooth surface. Then moonlight entered through the open window. It rested across the parchment like a flowing ribbon. Slowly, very slowly, thin silver lines began to appear. Not written in ink, not painted, simply revealed. The lantern keeper watched in silent wonder. More delicate lines emerged. They curved gracefully across the parchment. Tiny circles appeared. Little stars, crescents, gentle waves. The silver markings spread across the page until they formed what looked remarkably like a map. Not a map of roads, nor villages, nor coastlines. This map seemed to describe something altogether quieter. Constellations stretched across one corner. Flowing currents crossed another. Tiny lantern symbols marked peaceful gathering places. Several winding paths curved between them like streams of moonlight. She carried the parchment upstairs to the dream library. The round skylight welcomed the moonlight directly. As the silver glow deepened, more details slowly appeared. The lantern keeper laid the map upon the oak table. Immediately, several of the glowing dream jars brightened. Tiny silver reflections danced across their glass. The cedar box shimmered gently upon its waiting shelf. The grandfather clock answered with its familiar rhythm. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Then something wonderful happened. One tiny silver thread floated upward from the cedar box. Instead of rising toward the skylight, it drifted down onto the parchment. The thread rested lightly upon one small lantern symbol. That symbol brightened, then another, and another, until 7 tiny lanterns glowed across the mysterious map. The lantern keeper leaned closer, near the edge of the parchment. Delicate words slowly appeared. They were written in graceful silver letters that shimmered like frost beneath moonlight. They read, "Every dream remembers its own path." She whispered the words softly. The room seemed to grow even quieter, not because anything had stopped, but because everything was listening. She traced one winding silver path with her eyes. It curved between tiny stars, crossed gentle waves, passed beneath a painted moon. Finally, it ended beside the smallest lantern drawn upon the map. The lantern symbol matched the lighthouse almost perfectly. She smiled. So this is how they find their way. Outside, the lighthouse lantern began its slow evening circle. Its warm golden beams swept across the moonlit sea. Inside, the silver map glowed peacefully upon the table. Golden light from the lighthouse and silver light from the moon mingled together until neither seemed brighter than the other. One offered guidance. The other remembered the journey. The lantern keeper opened her leather journal. She dipped her pen into blue ink and wrote with steady hands. Tonight the moon shared a map. She paused while the grandfather clock marked another gentle moment. Then she added, "Perhaps no traveler is ever truly lost. Some simply remember their path a little later than others." She closed the journal. The silver writing upon the parchment remained visible for a little while longer. Outside, waves whispered faithfully against the cliffs. Inside, dreams rested peacefully upon their shelves. Far below, the little boat rocked once upon the quiet tide. Its pearl-glass lantern caught a sliver of moonlight and reflected it toward the lighthouse window. The silver map answered with one final shimmer. Then, as a cloud drifted softly across the moon, the glowing lines faded once more. The parchment became blank again. Only the lantern keeper knew the map was still there, waiting patiently for the next moonlit evening, waiting for the next dream that might need to remember the gentle path home. The moon remained high above the lighthouse long after the silver map had quietly hidden itself once again. Outside, the sea reflected the night sky so perfectly that it seemed as though two heavens had met, one above, one below. Between them, the lighthouse stood as a patient guardian, its warm lantern turning slowly, casting broad ribbons of golden light across the calm water. Inside the dream library, everything had returned to its familiar peace. The parchment rested upon the oak table, appearing perfectly ordinary beneath the candlelight. The cedar box shimmered faintly from its special shelf. The grandfather clock continued its gentle rhythm. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The lantern keeper smiled at the comforting sounds. She carefully rolled the parchment once more and tied it with its silver ribbon. Rather than placing it inside a drawer, she rested it beside the cedar box. Some things, she had learned, preferred to remain close together. The white feather lay quietly beside them, glowing softly whenever the lighthouse lantern swept past the library window. The room felt complete, satisfied that every dream had found its place for the evening. She descended the spiral staircase and prepared for sleep. She extinguished all but one beeswax candle in the cottage. Its gentle flame flickered beside the window overlooking the sea. Outside, waves continued their endless conversation with the cliffs. The sound had never changed, and perhaps that was why it felt so comforting. She slipped beneath a patchwork quilt stitched from soft shades of cream, blue, and pale green. The linen sheets carried the fresh scent of lavender that had dried in the summer sunshine. As she closed her eyes, the lighthouse lantern continued its slow turning above. Its warm glow passed across her bedroom ceiling every few moments, like the peaceful breathing of the house itself. Soon, the lantern keeper drifted into a gentle sleep. When dawn arrived, it came quietly. The eastern horizon brightened with delicate shades of apricot, pearl, and soft gold. Morning mist floated lazily above the sea, wrapping the cliffs in gentle ribbons that shimmered whenever sunlight touched them. The lantern keeper opened her window. Fresh air filled the room. It carried familiar scents: salt, rosemary, damp stone, fresh grass, and something else. A fragrance she had not noticed before. Sweet, delicate, almost like vanilla carried upon the breeze. She stepped outside. The garden sparkled with dew. Tiny droplets rested upon every flower and leaf, transforming the little paths into glittering ribbons beneath the morning sun. The robins had already begun singing. A pair of wrens darted happily beneath the cottage roof. Far below, the little boat remained beside the pier, still as peaceful as ever. The unfamiliar fragrance drifted once again through the air. The lantern keeper followed it slowly, past the lavender, past the rosemary, past the little bench where she often enjoyed her tea. Near the far edge of the garden, beside the old stone wall overlooking the sea, she stopped. Something new had appeared. There, nestled among the grasses, stood a circle of flowers she had never planted. Their leaves were deep emerald green. Their slender stems swayed gently, although almost no breeze stirred. Each blossom was the color of fresh cream. its petals opening into perfect stars. Tiny silver droplets rested along their edges. The flowers glowed so softly that they seemed to carry a little of the moonlight with them into the morning. The lantern keeper knelt beside them. Their fragrance was wonderfully calming. Sweet vanilla, fresh jasmine, a hint of honey, and the cool freshness of the sea after midnight. She had seen flowers bloom after rain. She had watched wildflowers appear each spring. But these felt different. One blossom slowly turned toward the lighthouse. Not quickly, only gently, as though greeting an old friend. The lantern keeper smiled. "Good morning." The flower seemed to glow just a little brighter. She reached out carefully. Instead of picking a blossom, she simply rested her fingertips upon one smooth leaf. It felt cool, silky, almost as though it had been woven from moonlight itself. The leaves held tiny beads of dew. Within each droplet, she noticed faint reflections of stars. Even though the morning sky had become bright blue, she remembered the raindrops that had once carried the night within them. Perhaps these flowers remembered too. She fetched a small watering can filled with fresh rainwater collected after the gentle shower several days before. The flowers hardly seemed to need watering. Still, she poured the water slowly around their roots. The earth drank it gratefully. Immediately, the blossoms lifted ever so slightly toward the sunlight. A soft breeze wandered through the garden. Every flower bowed together. Not from the wind alone. Almost like a quiet thank you. The lantern keeper laughed softly. "You are very polite." Nearby, a butterfly drifted through the garden. Its wings shimmered with pale silver and gentle blue. It landed upon one moonflower for only a heartbeat before continuing lazily toward the lavender. Soon several honeybees arrived. They moved peacefully from blossom to blossom, gathering nectar without hurry. The garden felt fuller somehow. Not crowded, simply more alive. After tending the flowers, the lantern keeper brewed her morning tea. Today she added one fresh mint leaf from the herb garden. She carried the steaming cup outside and settled upon her favorite wooden bench. From there she could see everything. The lighthouse tower rising proudly above the cliffs. The calm sea stretching toward the horizon. The mysterious little boat resting at the pier. And now, the circle of moonflowers gently swaying beside the old stone wall. The fragrance drifted toward her with every passing breeze. It seemed impossible to worry while breathing such peaceful air. Later that morning, she climbed to the dream library. Sunlight streamed through the round skylight. The dream jars glowed softly. The cedar box rested peacefully upon its shelf. The rolled moonlit map lay beside it. Everything appeared just as she had left it. Yet something had changed. A single white blossom rested upon the oak table. Fresh. Perfect. Its petals shimmered faintly with silver light. The lantern keeper knew at once. It matched the flowers blooming outside. She gently lifted it. The blossom was wonderfully light. Its fragrance filled the room with quiet sweetness. As she carried it toward the cedar box, one tiny silver thread drifted upward from beneath the lid. The thread circled the flower once, then disappeared. The blossom remained unchanged, yet its gentle glow seemed a little warmer. She found a small crystal vase and filled it with fresh rainwater. The moonflower floated upon the surface like a tiny white star, placed beside the leather journal. It transformed the entire table into something even more welcoming. The lantern keeper opened the journal. She dipped her pen into blue ink. After listening for a moment to the grandfather clock's gentle rhythm, she wrote, "This morning the garden welcomed flowers that bloomed with remembered moonlight." She smiled and added another line. "Perhaps the earth enjoys collecting pieces of the sky just as the sea does." Closing the journal, she looked toward the window. Outside, the moonflowers swayed peacefully in the afternoon breeze. A robin perched upon the old stone wall beside them. The little bird sang a cheerful melody before fluttering toward the cottage roof. The fragrance of the blossoms drifted inside once more. Far above, white clouds wandered slowly across the endless blue. Far below, Gentle waves continued their timeless dance against the cliffs. And as evening slowly began its quiet approach, the moonflowers folded their petals ever so slightly, as though already preparing to greet the stars when night returned. The morning passed with the unhurried grace of drifting clouds. Sunlight wandered slowly across the cliffs, warming the weathered stones one by one. The moonflowers continued to bloom beside the old garden wall, their creamy white petals opening a little wider beneath the gentle light. Every passing breeze carried their sweet fragrance through the lavender, around the cottage, and up toward the lighthouse tower. The lantern keeper moved through her familiar routines. She swept the front porch with a willow broom. She polished the brass door handle until it reflected the sky. She folded freshly dried linens that smelled of sunshine and sea air. Each small task felt like part of a quiet conversation with the lighthouse itself. Nothing needed rushing. The day seemed perfectly content to unfold one gentle moment after another. Far below, the little boat still rested beside the weathered pier. Its polished wooden hull glowed softly beneath the afternoon sun. The pearl glass lantern hanging from its bow caught tiny flashes of light whenever the waves rocked it ever so slightly. It had become a comforting sight. Like an old friend who spoke very little but was always pleased to be nearby. By late afternoon, the sea grew unusually calm. The waves became smaller. Their familiar rhythm softened until they scarcely disturbed the shoreline at all. The lantern keeper noticed the change while watering the rosemary. She paused. The silence felt different. Not empty. Expectant. She set the watering can beside the stone path and walked slowly toward the cliff overlooking the cove. The air carried only the lightest whisper of wind. Above her, gulls glided without flapping their wings. Even the clouds seemed to drift more slowly than before. She reached the overlook and gazed across the water. The ocean had become so smooth that it reflected the sky almost perfectly. The horizon nearly disappeared. Sea and sky blended together in gentle shades of blue. For a long while, she simply listened. At first, she heard only the quiet breathing of the waves. Then, something else. A sound so delicate that she wondered if she had imagined it. A single musical note. Soft. Pure. It floated across the water like a feather. It lingered for only a heartbeat before fading into the breeze. Then came another. And another. None were loud. None demanded attention. Together they formed a melody so gentle that it seemed woven from sunlight itself. The lantern keeper smiled. The tide is singing today. She closed her eyes. The music drifted closer. It did not resemble the song of birds, nor the whistle of the wind, nor the creaking of old ships. Instead, it sounded almost as though the sea were humming to itself. The melody rose and fell with the tide. Each wave seemed to carry a different note. Some were bright like morning light, others deep and comforting like evening. No tune repeated itself exactly, yet every note belonged. She followed the sound down the winding stone path toward the shore. The tide pools sparkled beside her feet. Tiny sea stars rested among smooth stones. Anemones swayed gently beneath clear water. Little silver fish darted lazily through ribbons of sea grass. The melody became clearer. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. From the waves, from the wind, from the shells resting along the beach, even from the damp stones warmed by the afternoon sun. The lantern keeper knelt beside the shoreline. A small spiral shell lay half hidden beneath the water. Its surface shimmered with soft shades of cream, pearl, and pale rose. As one gentle wave washed over it, the shell released another quiet note. The sound floated upward before disappearing into the open sky. She picked up the shell carefully. It felt pleasantly cool in her hands. Holding it close to her ear, she expected to hear the familiar whisper of the ocean. Instead, she heard the same peaceful melody. Each note drifted slowly through the shell's winding chambers. It sounded as though distant stars had learned to sing. She listened for several long moments. The melody never hurried. It simply continued. Steady. Comforting. Endless. She placed the shell inside her wicker basket and continued walking along the shoreline. Soon she discovered another shell, then another. Each held its own quiet voice. Some sang higher notes, others lower. Together they created a harmony so gentle that it blended perfectly with the breathing of the sea. The lantern keeper laughed softly. "So that is where your song has been hiding." The tide answered by washing another tiny wave across the sand. The water retreated, leaving behind one final shell. This one was larger than the others. Its smooth surface glowed faintly beneath the sunlight. She lifted it with both hands. Unlike the smaller shells, this one remained completely silent. She waited. Nothing. Then she smiled. "Perhaps you're listening." She carried all the shells back to the cottage. Inside, the warm scent of fresh bread greeted her. She arranged the singing shells upon the wide windowsill overlooking the sea. The larger shell rested in the center. As evening approached and the tide slowly began to rise once more, something wonderful happened. The smaller shells awakened. One by one, they released their gentle notes. A soft chime, a quiet hum, a peaceful whisper. The sounds blended together into a melody that drifted through every room of the cottage. The grandfather clock in the dream library continued its calm rhythm. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Soon, the shells and the clock seemed to accompany one another, neither leading, neither following, simply sharing the same peaceful moment. The lantern keeper climbed upstairs carrying the largest shell. She placed it upon the oak table beside the crystal vase holding the moonflower. The blossom's fragrance mingled with the quiet music filling the room. The dream jars shimmered softly. The cedar box released its familiar silver thread. This time, however, the thread did not rise immediately toward the skylight. Instead, it drifted gently toward the silent shell. It circled it once, twice, then disappeared into the shell's spiral center. For a brief moment, nothing happened. The lantern keeper waited patiently. Then, from deep within the shell, a single note emerged. Low, warm, gentle. It was unlike any of the others. The sound seemed to carry the memory of distant tides, quiet harbors, moonlit waves, and countless peaceful nights beneath the lighthouse lantern. The note lingered. The dream jars brightened ever so slightly. The moonflower in its crystal vase shimmered. Even the silver map, still rolled beside the cedar box, seemed to glow beneath its ribbon. The lantern keeper closed her eyes and listened until the final note faded into silence. She opened her leather journal. After dipping her pen into blue ink, she wrote carefully. Today the tide carried home a song. She listened to the shells as they continued their gentle chorus below. Then she added, some melodies travel across oceans not to be heard, but to remind the heart that it has always known them. She smiled as she closed the journal. Outside, twilight settled quietly over the cliffs. The lighthouse lantern awakened once again. Its warm golden beams stretched across the sea, where the rising tide carried tiny dream lights toward the waiting shore. The little boat rocked gently beside the pier. Its pearl-glass lantern reflected the first evening star. The moonflowers slowly unfolded beneath the returning moonlight. And from the cottage windows, the peaceful music of the sea drifted into the gathering night, joining the whispers of the waves as though it had always belonged there. Far beyond the horizon, another wandering dream paused for just a moment. Perhaps it heard the melody, or perhaps it simply felt the quiet comfort carried within it. Either way, it turned gently toward the lighthouse, where warm light, patient tides, and welcoming silence were always waiting. Another peaceful night passed beneath the watchful lantern. The lighthouse continued its slow and faithful turning until the final wandering dreams had found the warm golden light waiting upon the cliffs. One by one, the tiny dream lights drifted into the lantern's gentle embrace, and one by one, they continued on their quiet journeys home. Before dawn, the stars lingered a little longer than usual. They seemed reluctant to leave the sea. Their reflections shimmered across the calm water until the horizon slowly softened into shades of pale silver and lavender. Morning arrived wrapped in mist. Not a heavy fog that concealed the world. This mist was delicate, almost transparent. It drifted lazily through the garden, wandered between the lighthouse stones, and curled gently around the weathered fence posts before floating onward toward the sea once again. The lantern keeper opened the cottage door. The cool morning air greeted her like an old friend. Every breath carried the fragrance of damp lavender, fresh rosemary, salt water, and the faint sweetness of the moonflowers still resting after the night. The world seemed quieter beneath the mist. Even the robins sang more softly. Their cheerful melodies floated only a little way before disappearing into the pale morning air. She smiled. Some mornings invited conversation. Others invited listening. Today belonged to listening. After preparing a pot of warm chamomile tea, she wrapped herself in a light woolen shawl and wandered into the garden. Tiny droplets clung to every flower. Spiderwebs stretched between rosemary stems like delicate silver lace. The mist moved slowly around them, never disturbing a single thread. At the far end of the garden, the moonflowers had folded their petals into gentle ivory spirals. They looked peacefully asleep. The lantern keeper touched one blossom lightly. It felt wonderfully cool. Rest well. The flower seemed to settle even more comfortably beneath its blanket of mist. She continued toward the old stone wall overlooking the sea. Beyond it, the cliffs disappeared into soft white clouds that floated just above the water. The little boat could no longer be seen, nor the pier, nor even the waves below. Everything had become wonderfully gentle. She leaned upon the wall and simply watched the mist. Or perhaps, she watched the places where the mist quietly wasn't. For every now and then, a small opening appeared. A glimpse of the sea. A patch of blue sky. A weathered rock. Then the mist drifted back, wrapping everything once more in its peaceful embrace. The lantern keeper noticed something unusual. Near the center of the garden, where the morning light was beginning to brighten the air, several ribbons of mist had stopped moving. While every other strand continued floating toward the sea, these remained perfectly still. Curious, she walked slowly closer. The ribbons were no thicker than silk scarves. Soft white. Almost glowing. They floated only a few inches above the grass. Without wind. Without effort. They simply lingered. The lantern keeper reached out her hand. The nearest ribbon drifted gently toward her fingertips. Instead of passing through her hand like ordinary mist, it rested there, weightless, cool, silky. She smiled. "You're very comfortable." The ribbon curled around her fingers with remarkable gentleness. Soon another joined it. Then another. Each strand floated quietly beside the first. Before long, the lantern keeper found herself holding a handful of mist that somehow remained together without dissolving. She carried it carefully toward the cottage. The mist followed willingly. Inside, she placed the floating ribbons upon the wide wooden table. Sunlight streamed through the windows. Yet the mist did not disappear. Instead, it slowly began weaving itself. One ribbon crossed another, then another. They drifted together so gracefully that it hardly seemed like work at all. No hands guided them. No loom waited nearby. The mist itself seemed to understand exactly where every strand belonged. The lantern keeper watched in quiet wonder. Little by little, the woven shape grew larger. Its edges softened into gentle curves. Its surface shimmered faintly whenever the sunlight touched it. Within a short while, a blanket rested upon the table. It appeared to be woven from clouds. Its color shifted gently between pearl, pale silver, soft blue, and the faintest touch of lavender. It looked impossibly light. She lifted one corner. The blanket weighed almost nothing, yet it felt wonderfully warm. Not the warmth of fire, nor sunshine. Instead, it carried the comforting warmth of peaceful mornings. The kind that encouraged one more quiet moment before beginning the day. The lantern keeper draped it over the back of her favorite rocking chair. The blanket settled naturally into place. Immediately, the room seemed even cozier. The singing shells upon the windowsill released a few quiet notes. The kettle hummed softly upon the stove. Outside, the mist continued drifting through the garden. She poured another cup of tea and sat beneath the new blanket. Its softness surprised her. It felt lighter than feathers, cool for only a heartbeat, then pleasantly warm, almost as though it had quietly learned exactly what comfort was needed. She closed her eyes. The blanket carried the faint scent of sea air after rain, a touch of jasmine, fresh linen drying in the breeze, and something else, a fragrance difficult to describe. The peaceful stillness that sometimes lingered just before sunrise. It smelled like that. The lantern keeper laughed softly. I didn't know quiet had a fragrance. The blanket offered no reply. It simply wrapped itself a little more comfortably around her shoulders. Later that afternoon, she carried the blanket upstairs to the dream library. The grandfather clock greeted her with its faithful rhythm. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The dream jars glowed gently from their shelves. The cedar box shimmered. The moonlit mat rested beside it. The crystal vase still held its single white moonflower. Everything welcomed the newest arrival without a word. She folded the mist blanket neatly across a small reading chair beneath the round skylight. As soon as it touched the chair, something wonderful happened. Sunlight filtering through the skylight landed upon the blanket. Instead of passing through, the light settled softly within its woven threads. Tiny points of brightness appeared across its surface. Hundreds of them. The blanket now resembled a peaceful morning sky sprinkled with fading stars. The lantern keeper reached out and smoothed one corner. The little lights drifted slowly across the fabric before settling once more. It was as though dawn itself had decided to rest there. She opened her leather journal. After a thoughtful sip of tea, she wrote. Today the mist remembered how to weave. She listened to the gentle ticking of the clock, then added, perhaps comfort is something the world quietly creates whenever it notices someone slowing down enough to receive it. She closed the journal with a contented smile. Outside, the morning mist had gradually lifted from the sea. The little boat once again rested peacefully beside the old pier. Its polished hull gleamed beneath the afternoon sun. The pearl glass lantern hanging from its bow reflected the bright sky above. As evening slowly approached, fresh ribbons of mist began gathering once more along the shoreline. Not to hide the sea, only to tuck it gently beneath a soft blanket until morning returned. The lantern keeper climbed to the lantern room. She polished the great crystal lens until it sparkled with the colors of sunset. Soon the lighthouse awakened. Its warm golden beam reached across the quiet water. Far beyond the horizon, wandering dreams noticed the familiar light. One by one, they turned toward home. And high above the dream library, beneath the round skylight, the blanket woven from sea mist gathered the last golden rays of the day, holding them gently within its silvery threads until the first evening stars quietly arrived to take their place. The lighthouse greeted another peaceful dawn with its familiar calm. The last stars slowly faded into a sky washed with pale shades of ivory, soft blue, and the gentlest hint of rose. Below, the ocean breathed in long, unhurried rhythms, each wave arriving upon the shore with quiet certainty before returning to the wide embrace of the sea. The lantern keeper stood on the cottage porch with both hands wrapped around the warm cup of chamomile tea. The blanket woven from sea mist rested lightly across her shoulders. Though the morning air carried a cool breeze from the ocean, she felt wonderfully comfortable. The mist blanket seemed to understand mornings. It gathered the gentle warmth of the rising sun while keeping hold of the peaceful coolness that lingered from the night. Around her, the garden slowly awakened. Robins hopped between dew-covered grasses. A butterfly drifted lazily from the rosemary to the moonflowers, whose creamy blossoms were just beginning to unfold after resting beneath the stars. The fragrance of lavender floated gently through the air. Somewhere below the cliffs, the tide whispered against smooth stones. Every sound seemed perfectly placed. After finishing her tea, the lantern keeper climbed the spiral staircase toward the dream library. Sunlight filtered through the round skylight, filling the room with soft, golden circles that wandered slowly across the polished cedar floor. The dream jars glowed peacefully. The grandfather clock continued its steady rhythm. Tick, tock, tick, Talk. The cedar box rested upon its special shelf. The moonlit map remained neatly rolled beside it. The crystal vase held its single moonflower, still fresh and luminous. The blanket woven from sea mist shimmered faintly upon the reading chair. Everything appeared just as it had the evening before. Almost. The lantern keeper paused. Across the room, beside the tallest bookshelf, stood a narrow window she had never truly noticed. That thought made her smile. Of course she had noticed it. She had walked past it every day for years. Yet today, it somehow seemed new. The window was tall and gracefully arched. Its frame had been carved from pale oak polished smooth by time. Tiny stars and curling vines wound delicately around its edges. The glass itself appeared remarkably clear. So clear that it almost seemed invisible. Morning sunlight rested upon it without reflection. Curious, the lantern keeper walked closer. Outside the window she expected to see the familiar view of the cliffs, the sea, and the garden below. Instead, she saw only sky. Not the ordinary sky above the lighthouse. This sky stretched endlessly in every direction. Soft white clouds floated peacefully through a deep blue expanse. Golden sunlight drifted across them in quiet waves. There was no horizon, no sea, no land, only sky. She blinked once. The view remained unchanged. She opened the window slowly. It moved without a sound. Fresh air flowed gently into the library. The breeze carried no scent of salt, no fragrance of flowers. Instead, it smelled wonderfully clean, like sunlight warming fresh linen, like cool spring mornings before anyone had spoken, like quiet itself. The lantern keeper rested one hand upon the windowsill. The wood felt warm beneath her fingertips. She leaned forward ever so slightly. The endless sky remained perfectly still. Then something drifted into view. A single feather, white as fresh snow. It floated lazily through the blue, turning gently as invisible currents carried it onward. Soon another appeared. Then another. Dozens of tiny feathers drifted peacefully through the endless sky. None hurried. None fell. They simply wandered. The lantern keeper smiled. They seemed very happy. One feather floated closer. It reached the open window and paused. For a long moment it rested upon the breeze, almost as though deciding whether to continue. Then it drifted inside. The feather circled the room once. It passed the dream jars. It floated near the grandfather clock. It brushed softly past the crystal vase holding the moonflower. Finally, it settled beside the white feather that had arrived with the mysterious boat several days before. The two feathers touched. For just a heartbeat. They shimmered together. Then they became perfectly still. The lantern keeper noticed something curious. Although the feathers looked almost identical, they were not quite the same. The first feather carried the faint silver glow of moonlight. The new feather reflected warm shades of dawn. One remembered the night. The other carried the morning. She placed them gently side by side. Together they looked wonderfully complete. The open window continued welcoming the peaceful sky. Now and then another feather drifted past. Some floated close enough to enter. Others simply continued their quiet journeys through the endless blue. She never reached for them. If one wished to visit, it would. If not, that was perfectly fine. Late in the morning she carried her knitting to the reading chair beneath the skylight. From there she could see both windows. Above, the familiar round skylight framed the ordinary sky over the lighthouse. Beside her, the tall arched window opened onto the endless peaceful heavens beyond. The two skies looked remarkably different, yet somehow they belonged together. As she knitted soft blue yarn into another blanket for the cottage, she occasionally glanced toward the tall window. Clouds drifted slowly across the endless blue. Their shapes changed almost imperceptibly. One resembled a tiny sailing boat. Another looked like a sleeping whale. A third curled into the shape of a teacup before gently dissolving into the next cloud. Watching them felt wonderfully restful. Time seemed to slow. Or perhaps, time simply became easier to notice. The grandfather clock marked each gentle moment. Tick, tock. The knitting needles clicked softly. The dream jars glimmered. Outside, robins sang in the garden. Everything moved together in quiet harmony. As afternoon sunlight warmed the library, the tall window revealed something new. Far in the distance, barely visible among the drifting clouds, floated several tiny golden lights. The lantern keeper recognized them immediately. Dreams. Not lost ones. Not yet. These were dreams beginning their journeys. Tiny lights rising peacefully through the quiet sky before drifting toward the lighthouse later that evening. She watched them with gentle affection. So this is where you begin. The lights continued their slow voyage across the endless blue. None hurried. Each followed its own peaceful path. She realized then that the lighthouse did more than guide dreams home. It welcomed them at every part of their journey. The thought filled the room with quiet warmth. Before leaving the library, she opened her leather journal. Carefully dipping her pen into blue ink, she wrote, "Today a window remembered another sky." She paused, listening to the distant sound of waves below the cliffs. Then she added, "Every horizon is only one view of a much larger kindness." Closing the journal, she walked to the tall arched window one final time. The endless sky remained calm. One last feather drifted past, turning slowly in the gentle currents of invisible air. The lantern keeper lifted her hand in a quiet farewell. The feather continued onward, never hurried, never lost, simply trusting the breeze to carry it exactly where it belonged. As evening slowly approached, she closed the window. The view faded. Once again, ordinary glass reflected the warm cedar shelves of the dream library. Beyond it lay the familiar cliffs, the peaceful garden, and the calm sea stretching toward the horizon. The extraordinary had quietly become ordinary again, just as so many wonderful things often do. Above the lighthouse, the first evening star appeared. Below, the golden lantern prepared to welcome another night of wandering dreams. And somewhere high beyond the clouds, where quiet skies stretched farther than any map could measure, soft white feathers continued their gentle journey. Carried by a breeze that never forgot the way home, evening arrived with the quiet confidence of an old friend. The sun slipped gently beneath the western sea, leaving behind soft ribbons of amber, rose, and lavender that stretched across the horizon. For a little while, the ocean held every color, as though it wished to remember the sunset for as long as possible. The lantern keeper stood in the lantern room, polishing the great crystal lens with a linen cloth. The familiar scent of warm brass, cedar wood, and sea air surrounded her. Outside, the breeze had grown wonderfully gentle. It carried the fragrance of lavender from the garden below, mingled with rosemary, moonflowers, and the faint sweetness of jasmine that only seemed to awaken after dusk. One by one, the first stars appeared. The lighthouse answered with its own warm glow. Its golden beam began its slow, patient circle across the calm sea. Far beyond the horizon, tiny wandering dreams noticed the familiar light and quietly turned toward it. The lantern keeper watched until the first few dream lights had safely entered the lantern. Only then did she make her way downstairs. Tonight felt different. Not unusual. Simply inviting. As though the evening itself had come with a gentle surprise tucked quietly beneath its sleeve. Inside the cottage, she placed a small blue teapot upon the stove. It had tiny white flowers painted around its sides and a round lid that always rattled softly when the water began to simmer. She filled it with fresh rainwater collected from the copper barrel beside the porch. Soon, the comforting sound of the kettle filled the kitchen. She chose her favorite blend of herbs: chamomile, lemon balm, a touch of mint, one fragrant sprig of lavender. As the tea steeped, steam rose in graceful curls that drifted lazily through the warm kitchen. The windows stood open. The sea breeze carried the sweet aroma into the garden. She sliced a fresh loaf of bread still warm from the oven. A little honey rested in a small glass jar beside it. Nearby sat a plate of buttery oat biscuits she had baked that afternoon. The room glowed softly beneath the warm light of beeswax candles. Everything felt ready. Though she was not expecting anyone, the lantern keeper carried her tray outside to the little wooden table beneath the old climbing roses. The garden had become wonderfully peaceful beneath the evening sky. Fireflies drifted among the lavender like tiny floating lanterns. The moonflowers had opened completely. Their creamy petals seemed to gather moonlight into their quiet centers. The sea whispered beyond the cliffs. The air smelled fresh and comforting. She poured herself a cup of tea. The porcelain cup warmed her hands. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the sounds of the night. The lighthouse beams swept slowly across the sea. Somewhere below, the little boat rocked gently beside the pier. The singing shells resting upon the cottage windowsill released the faintest melody. Then, a tiny silver light floated into the garden. The lantern keeper opened her eyes. The light hovered above the table. Not one of the drifting dreams. This light was smaller, steadier. Its glow shimmered with the cool brightness of the evening sky. Soon another appeared. Then another. Within moments, a dozen tiny lights floated quietly above the tea table. They gathered together without touching. Each glowed with its own gentle radiance. The lantern keeper smiled. "You've arrived just in time." One of the little lights drifted toward the teapot. It hovered curiously above the rising steam. Another circled the honey jar. A third floated above the moonflowers, as though admiring their blossoms. The lantern keeper poured another cup of tea. Then another. Then another. She laughed softly. "There are not enough cups." As though hearing her words, the little lights gathered together. They shimmered once. Suddenly, tiny crystal teacups appeared beneath each of them. Perfectly clear. No larger than acorns. Each filled itself with a single drop of fragrant tea. The lantern keeper watched with quiet delight. The little lights settled gently above their tiny cups. The steam rose around them like soft morning mist. For a while, no one spoke. There was no need. The stars, or whatever they truly were, simply floated peacefully above the table. Enjoying the warmth of the tea and the quiet company of the garden, the lantern keeper took a slow sip from her own cup. It tasted especially comforting tonight, perhaps because she was sharing it. A gentle breeze wandered through the roses. Petals drifted lazily onto the tablecloth. One landed beside a tiny crystal teacup. A silver light rested upon the petal for just a moment before drifting upward again. Above the garden, the evening sky deepened into velvet blue. More stars awakened overhead. The little lights at the table shimmered in answer. The lantern keeper looked up. For one peaceful heartbeat, it became almost impossible to tell which stars remained in the sky, and which had quietly come down to visit. The moon rose above the eastern sea. Its silver light bathed the garden in a soft glow. The moonflowers seemed brighter than ever. Their sweet fragrance drifted gently across the table. One tiny silver light floated toward a blossom. As it touched the flower's center, dozens of tiny sparkling droplets appeared along the edges of the petals. They looked exactly like little stars resting there. The lantern keeper smiled. "So that's how you thank the flowers." The blossom shimmered softly. The little light returned to its crystal teacup. Nearby, the singing shells added a few gentle notes to the peaceful evening. The grandfather clock, heard faintly through the open library window above, continued its faithful rhythm. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The sounds blended together so naturally that it became impossible to imagine one without the others. Tea, stars, flowers, waves, dreams. Everything belonged. After a long while, the tiny crystal teacups slowly became empty. One by one, the silver lights rose into the cool night air. Before leaving, each circled the lantern keeper once. Not quickly, not dramatically, simply as though offering a quiet thank you. She lifted her cup in return. Safe travels. The lights floated upward, past the climbing roses, past the lighthouse lantern, higher and higher into the velvet sky. Soon they became indistinguishable from the countless stars above. Only the empty crystal teacups remained upon the table. The lantern keeper reached for one. The instant her fingers touched it, it became a single perfect dewdrop. The droplet rolled gently onto the tablecloth before disappearing into the cool evening air. She smiled. Of course. Some visitors preferred to leave no trace. She carried the tray inside. The candles still glowed warmly. The cottage felt wonderfully peaceful. Upstairs in the dream library, the cedar box released one delicate silver thread toward the round skylight. It rose into the night until it met one particularly bright star above the lighthouse. For just a moment, that star shimmered a little brighter than all the others. The lantern keeper opened her leather journal. She dipped her pen into blue ink and wrote, "Tonight the stars came down for tea." She paused, listening to the sea breathing gently beyond the cliffs. Then she added, "The finest conversations are sometimes shared without a single word." Closing the journal, she extinguished the final candle downstairs. Outside, the lighthouse continued its slow, faithful turning. The little boat rested peacefully beside the pier. The moonflowers gathered silver light into their quiet blossoms. And high above the sleeping sea, the stars resumed their places in the heavens, carrying with them the warmth of chamomile tea, the fragrance of roses, and the memory of one peaceful evening spent in the welcoming garden beside the lighthouse. Morning arrived so quietly that it seemed to tiptoe across the sea. The first light of dawn spread gently over the horizon, painting the water with soft shades of pearl, pale gold, and the faintest hint of lavender. The lighthouse stood peacefully upon its familiar cliffs, its lantern now resting after another faithful night of guiding wandering dreams. The garden sparkled beneath countless beads of dew. The moonflowers slowly folded their creamy petals, content after spending the night beneath the stars. Lavender swayed lazily in the cool breeze. The climbing roses stretched toward the growing light. The lantern keeper opened the cottage windows wide. Fresh ocean air wandered through every room, carrying the scents of salt, rosemary, warm cedar, and damp earth still cool from the night. She placed the kettle upon the stove. Soon its quiet hum joined the cheerful songs of robins outside. Everything felt wonderfully familiar. She enjoyed mornings like this, not because anything remarkable happened, but because ordinary mornings often carried the gentlest surprises. After breakfast, she wrapped the blanket woven from sea mist around her shoulders and stepped into the garden with her favorite teacup. The little boat rested peacefully at the pier below. The sea was calm. The sky above was almost perfectly clear. Only a few small white clouds drifted lazily overhead. They moved so slowly that one could almost believe they had decided to stay. The lantern keeper settled upon the old wooden bench overlooking the cliffs. Steam curled upward from her chamomile tea. She watched the clouds. Some stretched into long ribbons. Others gathered into soft round shapes. One looked remarkably like a sleeping rabbit. Another resembled a teapot. Floating through the blue, she smiled. Clouds had wonderful imaginations. As she watched, one tiny cloud drifted away from the others. It was no larger than the lighthouse itself. Perfectly round, bright white, soft as freshly spun wool. Instead of continuing across the sky, it seemed to pause above the sea. The lantern keeper tilted her head. "Good morning." The little cloud drifted a little closer. Still far above the cliffs. Still perfectly silent. Then she noticed something unusual. The morning sun shone brightly from the east. Every cloud cast a faint shadow upon the sea below. Every cloud. Except this one. The little cloud floated above the water without leaving the slightest trace beneath it. The lantern keeper blinked. The sea reflected its white shape perfectly. Yet no gentle gray shadow accompanied it. She waited quietly. Sometimes answers arrived only after enough silence. The little cloud drifted closer still. It hovered above the lighthouse garden. The robins continued singing. The lavender continued swaying. Nothing else appeared different. Then the cloud gave the tiniest puff. Not rain, not wind, only a little sigh. A few soft wisps floated downward. They drifted through the garden before dissolving into the morning air. The lantern keeper stood. "You seem to be looking for something." The cloud remained wonderfully still. Another gentle puff escaped. This time, several tiny white feathers floated down among the rosemary. They looked almost identical to the feathers that had visited through the sky window in the dream library. The lantern keeper bent to pick one up. It was light as ever, warm with sunlight. She glanced upward. The little cloud remained patiently waiting. Then she looked toward the sea. Still no shadow. Perhaps, she wondered, a cloud without its shadow might feel rather incomplete. The thought settled gently into her mind. Not as certainty, only as possibility. She carried the feather inside the cottage and climbed the spiral staircase to the dream library. Sunlight streamed through the round skylight. The dream jars glowed softly upon their shelves. The cedar box shimmered. The moonlit map rested peacefully beside it. The two white feathers lay together upon the oak table. The grandfather clock greeted her. Tick, tock, tick, tock. She placed the new feather beside the others. 3 feathers now rested together. One remembered moonlight. One carried dawn. And this newest one, it shimmered with the brightness of morning clouds. The lantern keeper smiled. You've all traveled different paths. Just then, the tall arched window, the one that sometimes opened onto quiet skies, gave the faintest shimmer. Without anyone touching it, the window slowly opened. Fresh air drifted into the room. Beyond it stretched the endless blue sky once more. Clouds floated peacefully through its vastness. Far away, something moved. Not a bird. Not another cloud. A soft gray shape glided slowly through the endless blue. The lantern keeper leaned closer. It looked remarkably like a shadow, not attached to anything, simply drifting. Gentle, weightless, almost as though it had become lost. She watched it for a long while. The gray shape wandered quietly among the clouds. It seemed neither lonely nor afraid, only uncertain where it belonged. The little cloud outside the lighthouse gave another tiny sigh. Its white shape drifted slowly past the library window. The lantern keeper looked from the cloud to the wandering shadow, then back again. She smiled. I think you've been looking for one another. She did not try to call the shadow. She did not wave. Instead, she opened the window a little wider. The breeze flowed gently through the room. The wandering gray shape noticed. Very slowly, it drifted closer. It crossed the endless blue with remarkable patience. Meanwhile, the little white cloud outside floated toward the tower. Neither hurried. Neither seemed worried about how long the journey might take. The lantern keeper waited beside the open window. Minutes passed. Perhaps longer. Time felt wonderfully unimportant. Finally, the wandering shadow reached the edge of the window. At precisely the same moment, the little white cloud floated beside the lighthouse. For one peaceful heartbeat. Both paused. Then, the gray shadow slipped gently beneath the cloud. No flash of light. No dramatic change. Only a quiet settling. The cloud looked exactly the same as before. Except now, far below upon the sea, a soft gray reflection drifted peacefully across the water. The cloud had found its shadow. The lantern keeper laughed softly. There you are. The little cloud seemed to grow just a touch brighter. It floated happily around the lighthouse once, then continued its gentle journey westward across the morning sky. Its faithful shadow glided beneath it upon the sea. Together, exactly as they had always belonged. Back inside the dream library, the tall window quietly closed itself. Once again, it reflected only the familiar cedar shelves and glowing dream jars. The grandfather clock continued measuring gentle moments. The cedar box released one delicate silver thread. It rose toward the skylight before disappearing into the bright morning sky. Perhaps following the little cloud. Perhaps simply greeting it. The lantern keeper opened her leather journal. She dipped her pen into blue ink and wrote carefully. Today a little cloud found its shadow. She listened to the distant sound of waves below. Then added, even the lightest travelers sometimes discover that something quiet has been faithfully following them all along. She closed the journal with a contented smile. Outside, the garden glowed beneath the warm sunshine. The moonflowers rested peacefully. The lavender danced in the breeze. The little boat remained beside the pier. Far above, the little white cloud drifted farther toward the horizon. Its gentle shadow followed faithfully across the sparkling sea. And somewhere beyond the endless blue, another wandering dream lifted its gaze toward the lighthouse, comforted by the simple truth that even things that seemed lost were often only waiting for the right moment to find each other again. The little cloud drifted westward until it became no larger than a pearl upon the horizon. Its newly found shadow glided faithfully across the sea below, so perfectly matched that it was soon impossible to imagine the two had ever been apart. The lantern keeper watched until both disappeared into the gentle brightness of the afternoon. Then she returned to the quiet rhythm of the lighthouse. The garden welcomed her with familiar fragrances. Lavender swayed softly beside the winding path. Rosemary released its clean, comforting scent whenever the breeze wandered through its silvery leaves. The moonflowers rested beneath the warm sun, their petals folded like peaceful hands waiting for evening. A robin landed upon the old stone wall. It tilted its head as though listening to something only birds could hear. The lantern keeper scattered a few sunflower seeds onto the grass. "Thank you for keeping me company," the robin answered with a cheerful song before fluttering toward the lighthouse roof. Far below, the sea shimmered beneath the afternoon light. The little boat remained beside the weathered pier, its polished wooden hull glowing with quiet warmth. The pearl glass lantern hanging from its bow reflected tiny flashes of sunlight that danced across the water. The lantern keeper picked up her wicker basket and followed the familiar path down to the cove. The tide was low. Smooth stones glistened beneath ribbons of clear water. Tiny tide pools mirrored the blue sky above so perfectly that they seemed like little windows into another world. Sea stars rested peacefully among rounded rocks. Anemones opened their delicate petals beneath the gentle current. Little silver fish drifted lazily between strands of sea grass. Everything moved with patient grace. She stepped onto the old wooden pier. Its weathered planks creaked softly beneath her feet. The little boat rocked once in greeting. "Good afternoon," the sea answered with a quiet sigh. She rested one hand upon the smooth wooden rail and gazed into the remarkably clear water below. Sunlight reached all the way to the sandy bottom. The waves were so calm that she could see every shell, every smooth pebble, every ribbon of green sea grass swaying beneath the surface. Then, a warm golden light flickered deep below. Not sunlight. Not the reflection of the lighthouse above. This light glowed steadily, softly, almost as though another lantern rested beneath the sea. The lantern keeper blinked. The golden glow remained. She leaned forward carefully. There, nestled among smooth stones at the bottom of the cove, stood a small lantern. It looked wonderfully old. Its frame appeared to be made of polished brass touched by countless gentle tides. Tiny seashells clung to its corners. Delicate strands of sea moss swayed around its base. Its crystal glass remained perfectly clear despite resting beneath the water. Most remarkable of all, a warm golden light shone peacefully within it. The lantern keeper smiled. "Well," she whispered, "I'd been wondering when we might meet." She did not know why those words came so naturally, only that they felt true. She watched the little lantern for several quiet minutes. Fish swam peacefully around it. Tiny bubbles drifted lazily upward. The lantern remained completely still, its warm glow gently illuminating the sandy seabed. Then something extraordinary happened. The little lantern answered the lighthouse. Far above, the great lantern atop the tower completed another slow turn. Its golden beams swept across the cove. For just one peaceful heartbeat, the light above and the light below seemed to meet. The underwater lantern brightened ever so slightly. Not dramatically, simply with quiet recognition. As though greeting an old friend, the lantern keeper closed her eyes for a moment. The sea breeze brushed gently across her face. The scent of salt and warm driftwood drifted through the air. When she opened her eyes again, she noticed tiny silver dream lights floating beneath the water. Not above it. Below. They moved slowly among the seagrass, their gentle glow blending with the lantern's warm light. Some drifted toward the lantern before continuing deeper into the sea. Others rose toward the surface, where they disappeared into the sunlight. The lantern keeper had always believed dreams traveled through the night sky. Now she wondered if some preferred quieter paths. Perhaps the sea guided dreams too. Perhaps every wave carried one gently home. She sat upon the edge of the pier and allowed her feet to dangle just above the water. The afternoon breeze stirred the surface into tiny ripples. The lantern below shimmered through them like a little golden star resting upon the ocean floor. A curious seal surfaced nearby. It blinked toward her with kind dark eyes. Then it turned toward the underwater lantern. For several peaceful moments, the seal simply floated there, as though enjoying its warm glow. With one gentle splash, it disappeared beneath the waves again. The lantern keeper laughed softly. "It seems you've made another friend." The lantern answered only by continuing to shine. As the afternoon slowly drifted toward evening, the tide began to rise. The water deepened little by little, yet the lantern remained visible. Its glow reached upward through the clear sea, growing softer but never fading. The lantern keeper remained on the pier until the first evening star appeared above the eastern horizon. Only then did she make her way back up the winding stone path. She carried with her no shell, no feather, no mysterious box. Only the quiet memory of the lantern beneath the waves. Inside the dream library, the room greeted her with familiar warmth. The dream jars glowed gently. The grandfather clock marked another peaceful moment. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The cedar box shimmered from its shelf. The rolled moonlit map rested beside it. The crystal vase still cradled its moonflower. She paused beside the tall arched window. Without opening it, she rested one hand upon the smooth oak frame. For just a heartbeat. The glass reflected not the garden outside, but the underwater lantern glowing peacefully upon the seabed. Then the reflection faded. The ordinary view returned. She smiled. Some friends, she thought, could be visited without ever leaving home. Opening her leather journal, she dipped her pen into blue ink and wrote, "Today I discovered a lantern beneath the waves." She listened to the distant rhythm of the tide below. Then she added, "Perhaps every place where dreams travel is gently watched by a patient light." She closed the journal and carried her tea upstairs to the lantern room. Night settled quietly over the coast. The lighthouse awakened once more, sending its warm beam across the calm sea. Far below, hidden beneath the gently rising tide, the little brass lantern continued shining with its own steady glow. One above, one below, neither brighter than the other. Together they welcomed every wandering dream, whether it chose to drift through the stars or follow the peaceful currents beneath the sea. High overhead, constellations slowly appeared across the velvet sky. Deep below, tiny silver dream lights floated among waving seagrass like stars beneath the water. Between them stood the lighthouse, faithful, patient, content to keep watch over both skies. The lighthouse watched over another gentle night. Its great lantern turned with slow and steady grace, sending warm ribbons of golden light across the sleeping sea. Far below, the little lantern beneath the waves answered with its own quiet glow, hidden among smooth stones and waving seagrass. Between them, the ocean rested peacefully. Above, the stars shimmered like tiny silver blossoms scattered across a velvet sky. Below, the dream lights drifted through the water with the same gentle patience. The lantern keeper remained awake a little longer than usual. She sat in the lantern room with a cup of warm lavender tea wrapped between her hands. The sea breeze slipped softly through the open windows, carrying the familiar fragrance of salt cedar and moonflowers blooming quietly in the garden below. She watched until the final wandering dream crossed the horizon. Only then did she descend the spiral staircase. The dream library welcomed her with its comforting stillness. The grandfather clock measured another gentle moment. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The dream jars glowed softly upon their curved cedar shelves. The crystal vase still held its single moonflower. The cedar box shimmered faintly beside the rolled silver map. The 3 white feathers rested together upon the oak table, each carrying its own quiet memory of moonlight, dawn, and clouds. Everything felt peaceful. Almost. The lantern keeper noticed a faint shimmer coming from the highest bookshelf. It was so soft that she nearly mistook it for moonlight. She carried a small beeswax candle across the room. There, tucked between several weathered journals bound in blue and green linen, rested a book she had never opened before. Its cover was deep midnight blue, not painted. The leather itself seemed naturally colored like the evening sky just after sunset. Tiny silver stars had been pressed into the binding. When she tilted the book toward the candlelight, they seemed to sparkle ever so slightly. There was no title, no name. Only one small silver lantern embossed upon the front cover. She smiled. "You've been waiting patiently." She lifted the book. It was lighter than expected. Warm, too, as though someone had been holding it only moments before. The lantern keeper carried it to the oak table beneath the skylight. She opened it carefully. The pages were perfectly blank, cream-colored, smooth, beautifully handmade. She turned another page. Blank. Then another. Still blank. She laughed softly. "I suppose you're waiting for the right story." She closed the book again. Outside, the moon drifted free from a passing cloud. Its silver light poured through the round skylight above. The moment moonlight touched the open pages, something wonderful happened. Tiny silver letters began appearing. Not all at once, one after another. Each word gently brightened before settling quietly into place. The lantern keeper watched without moving. No ink flowed. No pen wrote. The starlight itself seemed to be telling the story. The first sentence slowly appeared. "Every peaceful night remembers every peaceful morning." She whispered the words aloud. The room seemed to listen. Another line appeared. "Every lantern carries light. Every light carries kindness. Every kindness becomes a path." The silver letters shimmered softly. After a few moments, no more words came. The page rested quietly beneath the moonlight. The lantern keeper waited. She had learned that gentle things should never be hurried. The grandfather clock continued its calm rhythm. Tick, tock. A dream jar shimmered. The sea sighed beyond the windows. At last, another sentence slowly appeared. "Listen before asking. Notice before searching. Welcome before wondering." She smiled. The words felt less like instructions, and more like old friends quietly reminding her of something she had always known. She reached for her leather journal, then paused. No, tonight belonged to this book. Instead, she simply watched as another page slowly filled itself. This time, no sentences appeared. Instead, tiny drawings. A moonflower. The little boat beside the pier. The underwater lantern glowing beneath gentle waves. The mist blanket resting upon the reading chair. The singing shells upon the windowsill. The little cloud and its faithful shadow. Each picture shimmered with delicate silver lines. None remained perfectly still. The waves gently moved. The lantern glowed. The moonflower slowly opened and closed its petals. The cloud drifted ever so slightly across its tiny page. The lantern keeper leaned closer. The drawings seemed almost alive, not animated, simply remembering. She turned another page. Blank. Then another. Blank again. It appeared the book revealed only what the night wished to share. She rested one hand upon the cover. The leather felt wonderfully smooth. It carried the faint scent of cedar shelves, beeswax, and cool evening air. Outside, clouds drifted gently across the moon. The silver writing slowly faded, not disappearing, only becoming invisible once more. The pages returned to their quiet blankness. She closed the book carefully. Its silver lantern glimmered faintly. The lantern keeper placed it upon the shelf beside the cedar box. The two objects seemed quietly pleased by one another's company. The moonlit map rested nearby. The white feathers shimmered softly. The dream library had become home to many quiet wonders. Yet none ever competed for attention. Each patiently waited for its own gentle moment. Before leaving the library, the lantern keeper climbed one final time to the lantern room. The sky had become wonderfully clear. Countless stars stretched from one horizon to the other. The lighthouse lantern swept peacefully across the sea. As its golden beam reached the farthest edge of the water, one particularly bright star twinkled, then another. Soon dozens of stars shimmered together, not flashing, not signaling, almost as though they were quietly reading from the same invisible book. Far below, the underwater lantern answered with its warm glow. The little boat rocked gently at the pier. The moonflowers filled the garden with their sweet nighttime fragrance. The waves whispered against the cliffs. Everything seemed connected. By light, by memory, by kindness. The lantern keeper returned to the dream library one last time before sleep. She opened the midnight blue book again. One final sentence appeared. Only 7 words. Quiet hearts always recognize the brightest paths. She read them twice. Then, gently closed the cover. Opening her leather journal, she dipped her pen into blue ink and wrote, "Tonight I found a book that writes with starlight." She paused while the grandfather clock marked another peaceful moment. Then added, "Some stories wait patiently until the sky itself is ready to tell them." She closed the journal. The candle flickered softly. Outside, the stars continued their silent conversation above the sleeping sea. Inside, the midnight blue book rested peacefully upon its shelf, its blank pages quietly gathering the night's gentle light, waiting for another evening when the stars might choose to write once more. The lighthouse stood watch until dawn, where every dream, every wave, every feather, and every quiet story found a place to belong beneath its faithful light. Morning arrived quietly after a night filled with gentle starlight. The eastern sky slowly brightened from deep indigo to soft pearl, then to delicate shades of apricot and pale blue. The last stars lingered for a few peaceful moments before quietly fading into the growing light, as though reluctant to leave the calm sea below. The lighthouse rested after another faithful night. Its great lantern, now still, held the memory of countless dreams that had passed safely through its warm golden beam. Far beneath the cliffs, the little lantern beneath the waves continued its quiet watch, hidden among smooth stones where the sea whispered softly to itself. The lantern keeper opened the cottage door. A cool breath of morning greeted her. It carried familiar fragrances of lavender, rosemary, damp cedar, and fresh salt drifting in from the ocean. But there was something else. Fog. Not the thick fog that concealed the world, nor the delicate sea mist that had once woven itself into a comforting blanket. This fog felt older, gentler. It moved with quiet purpose. Silvery ribbons drifted slowly across the garden, curling around the weathered stone wall before slipping between the lighthouse and the cliff's edge. The moonflowers had already folded their creamy blossoms after their night beneath the stars. Tiny pearls of dew rested upon every petal. The lavender shimmered in the cool light. Even the robins sang more softly than usual, as though they, too, wished to honor the peaceful silence. The lantern keeper wrapped the mist blanket around her shoulders and carried a steaming mug of chamomile tea into the garden. She paused beside the old bench overlooking the sea. Usually, from here, she could see the little boat resting at the pier. This morning, the fog had hidden everything below. Only the faint sound of gentle waves reached her ears. She smiled. "Good morning." The fog drifted lazily across the cliffs. For a moment, it almost seemed to bow. She sat quietly, watching the pale ribbons wander through the garden. The warmth of her teacup rested comfortably between her hands. Steam curled upward, joining the fog for a brief moment before disappearing into the morning air. Then, something unusual appeared. Far out over the sea, where only moments before there had been nothing but soft gray mist, a faint line of silver slowly emerged. The lantern keeper narrowed her eyes. The line stretched farther, longer. Gradually it widened. It was not a wave, nor sunlight, nor a cloud. It looked remarkably like a bridge. She stood. The bridge seemed to be woven entirely from fog. Its graceful arch rose gently above the water, beginning somewhere beyond the hidden cove and reaching toward the distant horizon. It had no railings, no stones, no wood, only countless threads of luminous mist braided together so delicately that they appeared almost transparent. The bridge glowed softly in the morning light, not brightly, only enough to be noticed by someone who had learned to look slowly. The lantern keeper watched in quiet wonder. The bridge did not seem newly made. It felt remembered, as though it had always existed, patiently waiting for the right morning to become visible once again. She followed the winding path toward the cliffs. Each step was unhurried. The fog parted gently before her and drifted together again behind. By the time she reached the overlook, the bridge had become clearer. Its silvery surface shimmered with tiny droplets that reflected the pale sky above. Every curve looked impossibly smooth, as though the breeze itself had carefully shaped each strand. No footsteps marked its surface. No traveler crossed its length. Yet somehow it felt wonderfully welcoming. The lantern keeper rested her hands upon the old stone wall. The sea below remained hidden beneath the soft blanket of fog. Only the rhythmic sound of waves reminded her that the water was still there. A gull appeared from the mist. It glided silently toward the bridge. Without hesitation, it passed through the silver arch. For just one heartbeat, its white feathers shimmered with a faint golden glow. Then it continued peacefully into the open sky beyond. Soon another bird followed. Then a small cloud drifted beneath the bridge. The bridge responded with the gentlest ripple, as though greeting each passing traveler. The lantern keeper smiled. "You remember everyone." The fog answered by curling softly around the weathered stones at her feet. She closed her eyes. The air felt wonderfully cool against her face. Tiny droplets settled upon her hair and the shoulders of the mist blanket. Somewhere nearby, she heard the familiar melody of the singing shells drifting from the cottage window. Farther away, the grandfather clock measured another gentle moment. Tick, tock. The sounds blended naturally with the whisper of the sea. When she opened her eyes again, something remarkable had changed. The little boat had appeared. Not beside the pier. Instead, it floated quietly near the beginning of the fog bridge. Its pro-glass lantern glowed faintly despite the morning light. The boat did not move. It simply waited, almost as though it knew the bridge would remain only for a little while. The lantern keeper raised one hand in greeting. The little boat rocked once. Its polished hull reflected the silvery fog like liquid moonlight. Then, very slowly, the boat drifted beneath the bridge. It made no sound. No ripple disturbed the sea. The bridge shimmered gently overhead. As the boat reached the far side of the arch, it faded into the morning mist, not disappearing, only becoming part of the peaceful horizon. The lantern keeper remained by the cliff for a long while after that. She felt no need to follow. Some paths were meant to be admired rather than traveled. Some bridges existed simply to remind the heart that connection could be gentle. Eventually, the sun climbed a little higher. Golden light spilled across the ocean. Little by little, the fog began to lift. The silver bridge became softer. Its graceful arch slowly dissolved into ribbons of mist. Within a few peaceful minutes, it was gone. Only the familiar sea remained. Far below, the old pier stood quietly in the cove once more. And there, resting beside it exactly as always, floated the little wooden boat. The lantern keeper laughed softly. "You've already come home." The pro-glass lantern caught a ray of sunlight and answered with a warm glimmer. Back inside the dream library, everything greeted her as it always had. The dream jars glowed. The moonflower rested in its crystal vase. The midnight blue book waited patiently on its shelf. The cedar box shimmered beside the silver map. The 3 white feathers lay together beneath the round skylight. She opened her leather journal. After dipping her pen into blue ink, she wrote, "This morning the fog remembered a bridge." She paused, listening to the quiet rhythm of the grandfather clock. Then she added, "Not every path asks to be crossed. Some simply remind us that every distant shore is already connected by kindness." She closed the journal. Outside, the last ribbons of fog drifted peacefully out to sea. The lighthouse stood bright beneath the clear blue sky once more. The garden welcomed the sunshine. The waves sparkled below the cliffs. And somewhere beyond the horizon, where sky met ocean in the gentlest embrace, the forgotten bridge rested quietly within the memory of the fog, waiting patiently for another peaceful morning when someone might once again notice its silent beauty. The morning drifted onward with the easy rhythm of the tide. After the fog had quietly folded its silver bridge back into memory, the cliffs seemed brighter beneath the clear sky. Sunlight warmed the weathered stones, and every drop of dew slowly disappeared into the fresh ocean air. The lantern keeper spent the afternoon tending to the garden. She loosened the soil around the rosemary. She gathered a few sprigs of lavender to dry beneath the cottage eaves. She carefully watered the moonflowers, though they seemed content with little more than moonlight and morning dew. The familiar work felt peaceful. Every flower appeared grateful simply to be noticed. Above her, swallows traced graceful circles through the blue sky. Below, gentle waves rolled against the shore with patient certainty. The little boat rested beside the old pier, rocking so softly that its reflection remained almost perfectly still. As the sun began its slow journey toward the western sea, the air changed. Not colder, simply quieter. The breeze softened until even the tallest grasses hardly moved. The gulls settled upon distant rocks. The robins finished their evening songs. For a little while, the entire island seemed to pause. The lantern keeper looked toward the lighthouse tower. Sometimes silence carried its own invitation. She climbed the winding staircase, one familiar step after another. The smooth stone beneath her feet held the warmth of the afternoon. The cedar handrail carried the comforting scent of polished wood and beeswax. When she reached the lantern room, she opened every window. Fresh sea air wandered inside. The sky stretched endlessly around the tower. Far beyond the horizon, soft clouds glowed with warm shades of amber and peach. The sea reflected every color. The world seemed to breathe in long, slow rhythms. She polished the great crystal lens with a clean linen cloth. Its curved glass caught the fading sunlight and scattered tiny rainbows across the wooden floor. Each color drifted quietly before fading again. The lantern keeper smiled. Even light seemed unhurried here. As she finished her work, she noticed something she had somehow overlooked for many years. Above the lantern, hanging from an old cedar beam, rested a small brass bell. It was no larger than a teacup. Its surface had grown smooth with age, polished by countless seasons of sea air. Tiny carvings of stars, waves, feathers, and curling vines circled its rim. Its rope was woven from soft silver threads instead of ordinary cord. The bell had always been there. And yet, today it seemed ready to be noticed. She stepped closer. The bell hung perfectly still. No breeze touched it. No sound came from within. She reached out and gently placed her fingertips against the cool brass. It felt pleasantly warm, almost alive. "Good evening," she whispered. The bell did not ring. It simply rested quietly beneath her hand. She smiled. "I suppose you'll ring when you're ready?" She left it there and descended once more to prepare her evening tea. The cottage soon filled with familiar scents. Chamomile, honey, fresh bread, little rosemary warming in the oven. Outside, twilight deepened. The lighthouse lantern awakened with its slow golden turning. Dream lights began appearing beyond the horizon. Everything felt wonderfully ordinary. Then, very softly, a single bell note floated down through the lighthouse. It was so gentle that the lantern keeper almost mistook it for the singing shells upon the windowsill. The note lingered only a moment. Pure, warm, delicate, like sunlight gently touching crystal. She looked toward the ceiling. The bell had rung. Only once. She climbed the staircase again. The lantern room waited exactly as before. The brass bell hung perfectly still. No wind stirred it. Its silver rope remained motionless. The lantern keeper looked out across the sea. Nothing unusual. Dream lights drifted peacefully toward the lighthouse. The little boat rested quietly below. The stars slowly awakened overhead. Then another sound reached her. Not the bell. Laughter. Soft. Gentle. Almost impossible to hear. She looked down toward the garden. A family of rabbits had gathered near the moonflowers. 3 tiny kids explored the grass while an older rabbit rested nearby beneath the lavender. One little rabbit stopped beside a moonflower and sniffed its creamy petals. The blossom swayed ever so slightly, as though returning the greeting. The lantern keeper smiled. At that exact moment, the bell rang again. One clear note. The rabbits did not startle. The birds did not fly away. Even the waves continued their peaceful rhythm. The sound seemed to belong naturally to the evening. She began to understand. The bell was not announcing danger, nor calling anyone to attention. It seemed simply to notice gentle moments. Later, she wandered into the garden carrying her cup of tea. The rabbits had already disappeared into the tall grasses. Only tiny paw prints remained upon the dew-soft earth. She sat beneath the climbing roses and listened. Fireflies drifted among the lavender. The moonflowers opened fully beneath the rising moon. The lighthouse beams swept slowly across the sea. Far below, the underwater lantern glowed beneath the tide. A robin landed upon the stone wall. Instead of singing, it quietly fluffed its feathers and tucked its head beneath one wing. Content. Peaceful. The lantern keeper watched the little bird settle for the night. From high above, the bell offered another single note. Warm, gentle, grateful. She laughed quietly. So that's what you do? The bell answered with silence. As though agreeing, the evening continued. A breeze carried the fragrance of jasmine through the garden. The singing shells released their soft melody. The grandfather clock marked each passing moment. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The lantern keeper realized something wonderful. The bell never rang because time had passed. It rang whenever kindness quietly appeared. A flower opening, a bird finding rest, a wave returning gently to shore, a dream reaching home. No one decided when it should ring. It simply knew. She climbed once more to the dream library before bedtime. The dream jars shimmered softly upon their shelves. The cedar box glowed with its familiar silver thread. The midnight blue book rested peacefully beside the moonlit map. The mist blanket waited upon the reading chair. Everything welcomed the quiet evening. She opened her leather journal. After dipping her pen into blue ink, she listened for another moment. The lighthouse stood silent. Outside, the stars brightened one by one. Then, far above, one last gentle bell note floated through the night. She smiled and wrote, "Tonight I discovered the little bell above the lantern." After a thoughtful pause, she added, "Some hearts never need to be told when beauty arrives. They simply recognize it." She closed the journal. The candle flickered softly before settling into a steady glow. Outside, the lighthouse continued its patient turning. The little boat rocked gently beside the pier. The lantern beneath the waves shone with quiet warmth. The moonflowers gathered silver light into their blossoms. And high above the great crystal lens, the little brass bell rested peacefully once more, waiting without hurry for the next simple kindness that would quietly echo across the sea. The little brass bell remained quiet throughout the night. Yet somehow its gentle presence could still be felt. It hung peacefully above the great crystal lantern while the lighthouse turned with its familiar, patient rhythm, guiding wandering dreams across the calm sea. Each slow sweep of golden light crossed the waves like a warm promise that no traveler would ever journey alone. Below, the lantern beneath the water answered with its own quiet glow. Above, the stars watched from their endless sky. Between them, the lighthouse rested content, keeping company with both sea and heavens until the first pale hints of dawn appeared beyond the eastern horizon. Morning arrived wrapped in cool, silvery light. The air carried the clean fragrance of salt water, damp stone, cedar wood, and fresh rosemary still jeweled with tiny drops of dew. The lantern keeper awoke before the robins had begun their cheerful songs. She opened the cottage window. A gentle breeze wandered inside, lifting the linen curtains until they billowed softly like little white sails. The moonflowers had folded themselves into peaceful ivory spirals after their night beneath the stars. Fireflies had long since disappeared into the grasses. Only the steady breathing of the sea remained. She prepared her morning tea as she always did. Chamomile, a touch of lemon balm, one small spoonful of golden honey. The familiar scents soon filled the warm kitchen. After breakfast, she carried her wicker basket into the garden. There were herbs to gather, lavender to dry, fresh mint for tomorrow's tea. The day promised to be calm, perhaps even quieter than yesterday. As she walked along the narrow stone path between the flower beds, something caught her attention. At first she thought fallen petals had scattered across the grass. Tiny white shapes rested among the clover, dozens of them, perfectly still. She knelt for a closer look. Butterflies, each one no larger than the palm of her hand. Their wings shimmered with delicate shades of pearl, cream, pale gold, and the faintest hint of silver along their edges. None were moving. They simply rested upon the grass with folded wings, as though peacefully asleep. The lantern keeper smiled. Good morning. No wings fluttered. No tiny feet stirred. The butterflies continued their gentle rest beneath the warmth of the rising sun. She noticed another resting upon a lavender blossom, another upon the old stone wall. Soon she realized they stretched all the way across the garden. A winding trail of sleeping butterflies curved gently toward the cliff path. The sight was so beautiful that she hesitated to take another step. Instead, she carefully walked beside the trail. The butterflies remained undisturbed. The path wandered through the rosemary bushes, past the moonflowers, around the little wooden bench, then continued toward the cliffs overlooking the sea. The lantern keeper followed slowly. The morning breeze carried only the soft fragrance of wildflowers and salt. Above, swallows glided effortlessly through the blue sky. Far below, the little boat rested quietly beside the pier. The butterfly path continued. Every few feet another peaceful butterfly rested. Some upon smooth stones, others upon soft moss. A few balanced delicately on blades of grass sparkling with dew. Each seemed perfectly content, not asleep from weariness, simply enjoying stillness. When the lantern keeper reached the old stone overlook, the trail ended. There, upon the highest rock overlooking the sea, rested the largest butterfly of them all. Its wings were almost translucent. Morning sunlight passed gently through them, revealing delicate patterns like stained glass crafted from pearl and moonlight. The butterfly remained perfectly still. The lantern keeper sat quietly upon the warm stone nearby. She sipped her tea. The ocean stretched endlessly before her. Gentle waves shimmered beneath the growing light. The lighthouse tower stood peacefully behind her. No words seemed necessary. For several long minutes, nothing happened. Then, one tiny butterfly nearest the sea slowly opened its wings. Not quickly, not dramatically, simply with the quiet grace of a flower greeting the sun. Its wings shimmered once. Then it lifted gently into the air. It circled the lantern keeper exactly once before drifting toward the ocean. Soon another awakened. Then another. One by one, the butterflies slowly opened their wings. The entire winding path gradually came alive. None hurried. Each butterfly waited until the one before it had taken flight. The movement flowed through the garden like a gentle wave. From flower to flower. From stone to stone. From cliff to sea. The lantern keeper watched with quiet wonder. The butterflies rose together. Some drifted among the lavender. Others floated above the rosemary. Several danced through the climbing roses beside the cottage. The largest butterfly remained upon its stone a little longer. It seemed content simply to watch the others. Finally, it unfolded its luminous wings. For one peaceful heartbeat, the morning sunlight passed through them, scattering tiny silver reflections across the surrounding rocks. Then it lifted effortlessly into the sky. It floated toward the lighthouse. As it passed the lantern room high above, the little brass bell offered one gentle note. Clear, soft, warm. The butterfly continued its graceful journey. Soon every butterfly had taken to the air. Together they drifted over the sea. Not in a flock, not in formation, simply sharing the same peaceful morning. Their shimmering wings caught the sunlight until they looked like tiny floating pieces of dawn itself. The lantern keeper watched until the final butterfly became no larger than a silver speck against the horizon. Only then did she notice what remained upon the grass. Where each butterfly had rested lay a single tiny white petal, no larger than a raindrop. She gathered one carefully. It felt wonderfully soft. It carried the faint fragrance of jasmine and fresh morning air. She placed the tiny petal inside her wicker basket. Back at the cottage, she climbed to the dream library. The familiar room greeted her with warm cedar, polished wood, and quiet sunlight streaming through the round skylight. The dream jars glowed gently. The grandfather clock continued its patient rhythm. Tick, tock, tick, tock. She placed the little white petal beside the 3 feathers upon the oak table. For just a moment, the petals shimmered. A delicate silver thread rose from the cedar box. It touched the petal ever so lightly, then drifted upward toward the skylight. The petal remained unchanged, yet somehow it seemed to hold a tiny memory of wings. The lantern keeper smiled. Perhaps that was enough. She opened her leather journal. Dipping her pen into blue ink, she wrote, "This morning the garden became a path of sleeping butterflies." She paused, listening to the waves below the cliffs. Then she added, "The gentlest journeys begin not with flying, but with resting long enough to remember the sky." She closed the journal and placed it beside the midnight blue book. Outside, the day continued its quiet unfolding. The little boat rocked peacefully at the pier. The moonflowers rested beneath the afternoon sun. The lighthouse waited patiently for evening. And somewhere beyond the bright blue horizon, countless pearl-white butterflies drifted lazily upon the ocean breeze, carrying with them the calm fragrance of lavender gardens, warm morning sunlight, and the quiet certainty that every beautiful journey begins with a single peaceful awakening. The butterflies had long since disappeared beyond the horizon, yet their quiet visit lingered in the garden like the faint fragrance of lavender after a gentle breeze. Every flower seemed a little brighter, every leaf a little more content, as though the morning itself had smiled and left behind a peaceful memory. The lantern keeper spent the afternoon in familiar ways. She dusted the cedar shelves of the dream library with a soft linen cloth. She polished the brass kettle until it reflected the windows. She opened every cottage window to welcome the cool ocean air. The singing shelves upon the windowsill offered a few gentle notes now and then, never interrupting the silence, only weaving softly through it. The grandfather clock continued its faithful rhythm. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Each sound settled gently into the quiet rooms like a heartbeat. Outside, the sky slowly changed. The bright blue afternoon softened into pale gold. Clouds drifted lazily toward the western sea, their edges glowing with warm amber light. The little boat remained beside the weathered pier, its pearl glass lantern quietly reflecting the sky. The lantern keeper carried a woven basket down the familiar path toward the shore. Inside rested a folded linen cloth, a blue teapot, 2 warm cups, fresh oat biscuits, and a small jar of honey. She did not know why she had packed 2 cups. She simply had. Sometimes kindness prepared a place before knowing who might arrive. The tide was unusually gentle. Each wave slipped onto the sand with barely a whisper before gliding peacefully back into the sea. The old pier stretched quietly into the calm water. She spread the linen cloth at its end and poured herself a cup of chamomile tea. Steam curled upward into the cooling evening air. The sea reflected the fading sky so perfectly that the horizon nearly disappeared. For a little while, ocean and heavens became one. The lantern keeper sat quietly. There was nowhere else to be, no task waiting, only the slow unfolding of another beautiful evening. The first evening star appeared. Soon another joined it. Then another. The lighthouse lantern awakened above the cliffs, sending its familiar golden beam across the sea. Far beyond the horizon, wandering dreams turned gently toward its welcoming light. As twilight deepened, the moon slowly rose. It was nearly full, large and luminous. Its silver light spread across the calm water until a broad, shimmering path stretched from the horizon almost to the pier itself. The lantern keeper watched in quiet admiration. She had seen moonlight upon the sea countless times. Yet tonight something felt different. The silver path did not ripple with the waves. It remained perfectly smooth, perfectly still, almost solid. Then she noticed the water changing. Far out in the moonlit path, the sea became as calm as polished glass. Not another ripple disturbed its surface. The silver light gathered gently into a wide, quiet circle. It resembled a hidden harbor. A harbor made entirely of moonlight. She leaned forward slightly. The little boat stirred. Without wind, without tide, it drifted slowly away from the pier. The lantern keeper did not call after it. She simply watched. The boat glided across the silver path with effortless grace. Its pearl-glass lantern glowed softly, though no flame burned within it. The farther it traveled, the quieter the world became. Even the waves seemed to pause. The boat reached the glowing circle. There it came gently to rest. The moon hung directly above. Its reflection rested directly below. For one peaceful moment, it seemed impossible to tell where the moon ended and its reflection began. The harbor of silver light held them both. The lantern keeper smiled. The moon has come to rest. The words slipped into the evening as naturally as the tide. She poured tea into the second cup. The steam rose quietly into the moonlit air. No one appeared. Yet somehow the empty cup no longer felt empty. The silver harbor remained perfectly still. Then tiny lights began appearing upon the water. Not dream lights. Not stars. Small floating lanterns. Each no larger than a flower blossom. Warm golden light glowed within delicate shells of crystal. One by one they drifted into the moonlit harbor. Some floated beside the little boat. Others rested quietly around the edge of the silver circle. None touched. Each seemed to know exactly where it belonged. The lantern keeper counted until she reached 12. Then she simply enjoyed watching them. The lanterns swayed ever so gently. Their warm glow mingled with the cool silver moonlight until the harbor shimmered with quiet harmony. Above, the lighthouse lantern continued its slow turning. Below, the underwater lantern answered beneath the sea. And now, between them both, these tiny floating lanterns created another gentle constellation upon the water. The lantern keeper closed her eyes. The sea breeze brushed softly across her face. It carried the fragrance of salt, moonflowers blooming on the cliffs above, and fresh cedar drifting from the lighthouse. The singing shells offered a few peaceful notes. The little brass bell high in the lantern room rang once. The sound floated across the sleeping sea. None of the floating lanterns moved. They simply glowed a little warmer. When she opened her eyes again, she noticed something extraordinary. The moon itself appeared closer. Not larger, only nearer. Its silver light rested upon the water like a soft blanket spread lovingly across the sea. For a quiet heartbeat, it felt as though the moon had chosen this hidden harbor as a place to rest before continuing its journey across the sky. It glided back toward the pier. Soon it rested exactly where it had begun, as though it had never left. The lantern keeper gathered her teacups. The second cup remained untouched. Yet when she lifted it, it still felt pleasantly warm. She smiled. Some guests left only comfort behind. Back inside the dream library, moonlight poured through the round skylight. The midnight blue book rested quietly upon its shelf. The cedar box shimmered. The silver map slept beneath its ribbon. The crystal vase still cradled the moonflower. The tiny white butterfly petal lay beside the 3 feathers. Everything felt quietly complete. She opened her leather journal. Dipping her pen into blue ink, she wrote, "Tonight I found a harbor where the moon rested." She listened to the steady ticking of the grandfather clock. Then added, "The gentlest lights know when to pause, for even the brightest journeys are made more beautiful by peaceful places to rest." She closed the journal. Outside, the lighthouse continued its faithful watch. The sea breathed softly against the cliffs. The moon climbed peacefully through the velvet sky. And somewhere beyond the silver horizon, hidden from hurried eyes, the quiet harbor waited patiently, ready to welcome the moon again whenever the night wished to rest upon the sea. The harbor of moonlight slowly became a memory. As the night continued its gentle journey, the silver circle upon the sea faded into soft ripples, and the little floating lanterns quietly disappeared into the peaceful darkness. The little boat rested once more beside the weathered pier, rocking so gently that it scarcely disturbed its reflection. Above, the lighthouse continued its faithful watch. Its warm golden beams swept across the sleeping ocean with slow, comforting certainty. Far below the waves, the hidden lantern answered with its own quiet glow. Between sea and sky, every dream found its way home. The lantern keeper slept deeply. When morning arrived, it did not bring bright sunshine. Instead, soft gray clouds gathered across the sky like layers of warm wool folded gently overhead. The air smelled different. Fresh. Cool. Filled with the rich fragrance of damp earth, cedar wood, salt water, and rosemary. She opened the cottage window. A tiny drop of rain landed upon the wooden sill. Then another. Soon a gentle shower began. Not a storm. Only the kind of rain that seemed to whisper instead of fall. The lantern keeper smiled. "Good morning." The rain answered with thousands of tiny silver notes upon the roof. She prepared her morning tea. Today she chose a blend of chamomile, mint, and a little wild thyme gathered from the garden. Steam rose peacefully from the blue teapot. The warmth filled the cozy kitchen while rain softly tapped against the windows. Outside, every leaf welcomed the gentle shower. The lavender bowed gracefully beneath sparkling droplets. The rosemary shimmered. The old climbing roses gathered pearls of rain along every petal. Even the weathered lighthouse stones seemed to breathe more deeply as the rain washed over them. The lantern keeper wrapped the mist blanket around her shoulders and stepped onto the covered porch. She settled into the old rocking chair with her cup of tea. The chair creaked softly as it rocked. The sound blended perfectly with the steady rhythm of falling rain. For a long while, she simply listened. Rain upon the roof. Rain upon the garden. Rain upon the sea. Each surface gave the drops a slightly different voice. The wooden porch sounded warm and gentle. The stone pathway answered with quiet little echoes. The lavender whispered. The ocean sighed. Every place sang its own small melody. Then she noticed something remarkable. The rain was not making new songs. It was remembering old ones. One drop landed upon the porch railing. For just a heartbeat, it sounded exactly like the gentle note of the little brass bell. Another touched a smooth seashell. It echoed the singing shells upon the cottage windowsill. A drop fell into the bird bath. Its soft ripple reminded her of the little boat rocking at the pier. Rain tapped against the library window. The rhythm became the familiar heartbeat of the grandfather clock. Tick, tap, tock, tap. She closed her eyes. The rain gathered every quiet sound the lighthouse had ever known. The laughter of tiny stars drinking tea. The whisper of feathers drifting through endless skies. The soft splash of dream lights beneath the sea. The opening petals of moonflowers. The flutter of sleeping butterflies awakening. The silver bridge remembered by the fog. Each memory returned gently through the falling rain. The lantern keeper listened with peaceful delight. No melody hurried into the next. Every memory was given its own quiet moment. When she opened her eyes again, she noticed tiny puddles forming along the stone path. Each reflected a different part of the sky. One held drifting gray clouds. Another reflected the lighthouse. A third shimmered with the branches of the old cedar tree. She stepped carefully into the garden. The rain rested lightly upon her mist blanket without soaking it. It felt cool and refreshing, almost playful. As she walked between the flower beds, she paused beside the moonflowers. Though they usually slept through the day, today they remained half open, catching the gentle rain inside their creamy petals. Each blossom cradled a tiny pool of water. When a raindrop landed there, it created a clear musical tone. Not loud, only delicate. The lantern keeper leaned closer. Every flower sang a different note. Together, they formed a quiet melody that rose above the steady whisper of the rain. She laughed softly. "So you've been practicing." The blossoms swayed almost imperceptibly. Far above, the little brass bell offered one warm chime. As though agreeing, the rain continued throughout the afternoon. The sea disappeared behind soft silver curtains. The cliffs became gentle silhouettes. Everything seemed wrapped inside a peaceful watercolor painting. Inside the dream library, the cedar shelves glowed warmly in the dim light. The dream jars shimmered softly. The midnight blue book rested quietly upon its shelf. The 3 white feathers lay beside the tiny butterfly petal. The crystal vase still held the moonflower, now wearing tiny droplets along its white petals. The lantern keeper opened the tall arched window. Instead of revealing the endless blue sky as it sometimes did, it opened onto falling rain. Not ordinary rain. Thousands upon thousands of luminous silver droplets drifted through a sky of soft pearl clouds. Each drop glowed faintly. As they fell, they released tiny notes. Together they formed a melody so peaceful that it almost felt like breathing. She listened without counting the time. Perhaps minutes passed. Perhaps an hour. Eventually the rain beyond the magical window faded into mist. The window quietly returned to its ordinary view of the lighthouse garden. Outside, the real rain had begun to slow. The clouds gradually parted. A beam of late afternoon sunlight slipped through, touching the wet garden with warm golden light. Every raindrop sparkled. The lavender glittered like tiny amethysts. The roses shone with crystal edges. The old stone wall gleamed softly. Then, stretching across the eastern sky, appeared the gentlest rainbow. Its colors were pale, almost transparent, as though painted with morning mist instead of bright paint. The lantern keeper stood quietly beneath the porch roof and admired it. The rainbow seemed less like an ending to the rain, and more like the rain's final song. Before evening arrived, she climbed to the dream library and opened her leather journal. She dipped her pen into blue ink. Carefully she wrote. Today the rain remembered every song. She paused while the grandfather clock measured another peaceful moment. Tick, tock. Then she added, "Nothing beautiful is ever truly forgotten." The world quietly hums its favorite melodies until the rain gently teaches us how to hear them again. She closed the journal. Outside, the last raindrops slipped from the cedar branches. The sea emerged once more beneath a clearing sky. The lighthouse lantern prepared for another peaceful night. The little boat rested quietly beside the pier. Far beneath the waves, the hidden lantern glowed with patient warmth. And high above, where the clouds drifted slowly toward distant horizons, the rain carried every gentle song it had ever gathered, ready to return them one quiet morning to anyone willing to pause, listen, and simply be still. Morning returned with a gentle golden glow after the quiet rain. The eastern sky stretched awake in soft shades of honey, pearl, and pale blue. The last raindrops clung to every leaf and flower, catching the early sunlight until the entire garden shimmered as though it had been dusted with tiny crystals. The lighthouse stood peacefully upon its cliff. Its lantern had rested after another calm night of guiding wandering dreams across the sea. Below, the little lantern beneath the waves continued its faithful glow among smooth stones and waving sea grass. The lantern keeper opened the cottage door. Fresh morning air welcomed her with the comforting fragrance of damp cedar, rosemary, lavender, salt, and rich earth still cool from yesterday's rain. She breathed deeply. The world seemed wonderfully washed. Even the ocean appeared softer somehow. She prepared her morning tea. Chamomile, a few fresh mint leaves, one tiny spoonful of honey. The familiar blue teapot released gentle curls of steam that wandered lazily through the warm kitchen. Outside, robins greeted the new day with cheerful songs. The singing shells upon the windowsill answered with a melody almost too quiet to notice. Everything felt refreshed. After breakfast, the lantern keeper carried her teacup into the garden. The stone path still held tiny puddles reflecting drifting white clouds. The moonflowers had folded themselves into neat ivory spirals after their long night beneath the stars. Lavender glistened with dew. The climbing roses sparkled beneath the morning sun. As she walked slowly between the flower beds, she noticed something curious. The old sundial near the center of the garden looked different. It had always rested beneath the cedar tree, carved from smooth gray stone with delicate patterns of stars, vines, and tiny waves circling its face. Yet today, fresh green ivy had quietly wrapped itself around its base. Tiny blue flowers bloomed between the leaves. She could not remember planting them. The blossoms were no larger than the tip of her thumb. Each held a tiny golden center that glowed softly in the morning light. The lantern keeper knelt beside them. "They're beautiful." The flowers swayed gently. Not because of the breeze. Almost as though they had heard her. She reached toward one blossom but stopped before touching it. Some beautiful things preferred simply to be admired. She sat upon the nearby wooden bench. The sundial cast its familiar shadow across the engraved stone. Or at least, it appeared familiar. After a while, she noticed something impossible. The shadow was moving, not steadily as ordinary shadows do. It would rest quietly for several minutes, then drift forward ever so slightly, then pause again. The movement was so gentle that it resembled the opening of a flower rather than the passing of time. The lantern keeper smiled. So today, time is blooming. The thought settled softly into her heart. Not every day measured itself the same way. Some days hurried, others lingered, and perhaps this garden had quietly chosen its own rhythm. She sipped her tea while watching the slow dance of sunlight and shadow. A butterfly drifted past. It landed upon one of the tiny blue flowers. Instead of flying away after a moment, it remained perfectly still. The blossom beneath it slowly opened a little wider. Then another blossom nearby unfolded. Soon several flowers blossomed together. Not because the sun had grown warmer, simply because enough quiet had gathered around them. The lantern keeper watched with peaceful delight. Every few minutes another bloom unfolded somewhere in the garden. The lavender seemed a little taller. The roses opened one petal at a time. Even the rosemary stretched gently toward the light. Nothing rushed. Nothing waited. Everything simply grew at exactly the pace it wished. She wandered slowly toward the vegetable patch behind the cottage. The tomato vines wore tiny yellow blossoms. The herbs glistened. A pumpkin leaf gently unfurled before her eyes, so slowly that she almost wondered if she imagined it. But no. The garden truly seemed alive with patient unfolding. The little brass bell above the lantern room rang once. Its soft note floated down through the still air. Far below, the sea answered with a gentle sigh. The lantern keeper looked toward the lighthouse. Sunlight reflected from the great crystal lens, scattering tiny rainbows across the nearby stones. The colors rested there quietly before fading. Everything belonged to the same peaceful rhythm. She followed the winding path to the old cedar tree. Its broad branches spread generous shade across the garden. At its roots rested the smooth gray stone where she often enjoyed reading. Today, the midnight blue book was already there. She was quite certain she had left it safely inside the dream library. Yet here it rested beneath the tree. She smiled instead of questioning it. The book seemed to enjoy little adventures of its own. She opened it. The pages remained blank. Then a single silver sentence slowly appeared. "Flowers do not hurry toward tomorrow." She read the words aloud. The breeze carried them gently through the garden. Almost immediately, another sentence shimmered into view. "They become today completely." The silver letters glowed softly before fading once more into blank cream-colored pages. The lantern keeper closed the book and rested it upon her lap. She leaned comfortably against the cedar trunk. Above her, sunlight filtered through thousands of green needles. The air smelled of warm bark, rain-soaked earth, and wild herbs. She closed her eyes. The garden spoke without words. Bees hummed lazily among the blossoms. Leaves whispered overhead. Tiny waves rolled against distant cliffs. The grandfather clock drifted faintly through the open library window. Tick, tock, tick, tock. For a little while, it became impossible to tell whether the garden followed the clock, or whether the clock had quietly learned its rhythm from the garden. When she opened her eyes again, afternoon had arrived, though it felt as if only a few peaceful moments had passed. The tiny blue flowers now carpeted the ground around the sundial. Their golden centers shimmered softly beneath the sunlight. The shadows still moved with extraordinary patience, almost blooming from one hour into the next. The lantern keeper returned to the dream library before evening. The dream jars glowed warmly upon their cedar shelves. The 3 white feathers rested beside the butterfly petal. The cedar box shimmered quietly. The moonlit map remained rolled beside it. She placed the midnight blue book back upon its shelf. It seemed content to be home again. Opening her leather journal, she dipped her pen into blue ink. She wrote carefully. Today the garden allowed time to bloom slowly. She paused, listening to the waves below and the quiet ticking of the grandfather clock. Then she added, "Perhaps the most peaceful days are not the longest ones, but the ones that fully open. Just like flowers welcoming the morning sun." She closed the journal with a gentle smile. Outside, the garden continued its slow unfolding beneath the afternoon light. The lighthouse stood watch above the sea. The little boat rocked peacefully beside the pier. The lantern beneath the waves glowed with quiet warmth. And among the tiny blue blossoms surrounding the old sundial, time itself seemed perfectly happy to bloom one peaceful moment at a time, never rushing toward tomorrow, always content to become exactly what today had quietly promised. The little blue flowers remained open until sunset. As the afternoon slowly softened into evening, their golden centers reflected the last warm rays of sunlight. One by one, they gently folded their petals, not because the light had disappeared, but because they trusted it would return with another peaceful dawn. The lantern keeper smiled as she watched them. The garden always seemed to know exactly when to rest. She gathered her watering can and carried it back to the cottage. The familiar scent of cedar greeted her as she stepped inside. The windows stood open, welcoming the cool ocean breeze. From somewhere below the cliffs came the slow rhythm of the waves, steady and comforting, as though the sea were humming itself toward another quiet night. She lit a single beeswax candle in the kitchen. Its warm glow danced softly across the wooden table. Tonight felt perfect for sewing. Not because anything needed mending, simply because evenings often enjoyed slow hands and patient stitches. She climbed to the dream library. Golden twilight streamed through the round skylight, painting long ribbons of amber across the polished cedar floor. The dream jars glowed gently upon their shelves. The grandfather clock continued its faithful conversation with time. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The midnight blue book rested quietly where she had returned it. The cedar box shimmered with a faint silver thread. The moonlit map slept beneath its ribbon. The 3 white feathers lay beside the tiny butterfly petal. Everything welcomed the evening with familiar calm. The lantern keeper opened an old cedar chest beneath the reading chair. Inside rested bundles of soft fabric folded with loving care. Some pieces were woven linen, others were gentle wool. A few were smooth cotton faded by years of sunlight. Each carried its own quiet memory. She spread the fabrics across the oak table. One square held the pale blue of morning skies. Another shimmered with silver thread like moonlight upon calm water. A deep green piece reminded her of rosemary after rain. Soft lavender cloth carried the faint fragrance of dried flowers. Cream-colored linen resembled folded moonflowers waiting for evening. She ran her fingers across each one. The textures felt wonderfully comforting. She threaded a fine needle with silver blue thread. Then she began to sew. One careful stitch. Then another. No pattern had been planned. The pieces simply seemed to find one another naturally. The pale blue rested beside the silver. The lavender welcomed the cream. The green settled peacefully between them. The lantern keeper smiled. Some quilts knew how they wished to grow. Outside, twilight deepened. The lighthouse lantern awakened above the sea. Its warm golden beams slowly began its familiar turning. The little lantern beneath the waves answered quietly below. Between them, the evening stretched gently across the ocean. As she continued sewing, something curious happened. Each square of fabric slowly gathered a tiny memory. The pale blue cloth reflected drifting clouds. The silver fabric shimmered with quiet stars. The green square carried the scent of cedar and rosemary. The cream-colored linen glowed softly like moonflowers beneath the full moon. The lantern keeper paused. She touched the fabrics gently. Each remained perfectly ordinary. Yet each somehow remembered a peaceful evening from long ago. Not exact moments, only feelings. The warmth of tea shared beside an open window. The sound of gentle rain upon the roof. The quiet laughter of stars gathered around tiny crystal teacups. The flutter of butterflies awakening with the morning sun. The silver bridge woven from remembering fog. Every stitch seemed to gather another calm memory. She did not force them. She simply welcomed whatever arrived. The singing shells upon the windowsill released a soft melody. The little brass bell rang once above the lantern room. Far beyond the windows, dream lights floated steadily toward the lighthouse. Everything seemed to sew itself together. Light, sound, memory, kindness. The quilt slowly grew across the table. Its edges curved gently like rolling waves. The silver thread caught the candlelight. Tiny stars appeared embroidered among the stitches, though she did not remember sewing them. Little moonflowers blossomed quietly across one corner. Near another edge, delicate feathers shimmered within the weave. A tiny boat rested beside embroidered waves. A little brass lantern glowed beneath stitched seas. A winding path of butterflies crossed a field of lavender. The fog bridge arched quietly through silver clouds. The moon rested upon calm water. The rain became fine lines of sparkling thread. The old sundial bloomed among tiny blue flowers. Every peaceful chapter of the lighthouse had somehow found its place within the quilt. The lantern keeper laughed softly. "You've been making yourselves comfortable." The quilt answered only by growing warmer beneath her hands. Outside, the moon rose slowly above the sea. Its silver light poured through the round skylight. The quilt shimmered. For one peaceful moment, the stitched stars twinkled gently. The embroidered waves seemed to ripple. The little boat rocked almost imperceptibly. Not moving, simply remembering movement. The lantern keeper folded the finished quilt carefully. It felt surprisingly light. When she draped it across the reading chair, the room seemed instantly cozier. The chair appeared to sigh with quiet contentment. She smiled. "That suits you." She settled into the chair beneath the quilt with a warm cup of chamomile tea. Its gentle weight rested comfortably across her lap. The fabric held just the right amount of warmth. Not too much, not too little. As though every peaceful evening sewn into it quietly shared its comfort. The grandfather clock continued measuring gentle moments. Tick, tock. The dream jars glowed softly. The midnight blue book rested peacefully. The cedar box shimmered. Outside, the lighthouse beams swept patiently across the sleeping sea. The lantern keeper closed her eyes for a little while. Not sleeping, simply listening. The quilt seemed to hum with all the quiet evenings it remembered. The melody blended with the waves below, the singing shells, the distant bell. and the whispering breeze until it became impossible to tell where one gentle sound ended and another began. Eventually, she opened her leather journal. Dipping her pen into blue ink, she wrote, "Tonight I finished a quilt sewn from quiet evenings." She paused as the moonlight rested softly upon the page. Then she added, "The gentlest comforts are stitched together one peaceful moment at a time, until even ordinary evenings become something warm enough to wrap around the heart." She closed the journal and extinguished the candle. Only moonlight remained. Outside, the stars brightened above the calm sea. The little boat rested beside the pier. The lantern beneath the waves glowed faithfully. The garden slept beneath silver light. And inside the dream library, the quilt lay quietly across the reading chair, holding within its gentle stitches every peaceful evening the lighthouse had ever lovingly remembered, ready to warm every quiet story still waiting to be told. Night slowly drifted toward dawn. The stars lingered above the lighthouse for a little while longer, their reflections trembling softly upon the calm sea below. The great lantern completed its final gentle circles before welcoming the first pale light of morning. Far beneath the waves, the little lantern resting among smooth stones continued to glow with quiet patience. The two lights greeted one another one last time before sunrise. Then the horizon slowly brightened. Soft shades of pearl spread across the eastern sky. Lavender melted into pale gold. The ocean welcomed every new color with graceful calm. The lantern keeper awoke before the robins began to sing. The cottage was wonderfully quiet. She wrapped the quilt sewn from quiet evenings around her shoulders. Its gentle warmth still carried the comforting memories stitched into every square. The little embroidered stars shimmered ever so faintly in the early morning light before settling peacefully into the fabric once again. She smiled. "Good morning." The quilt rested comfortably around her. Downstairs, she prepared her familiar morning tea. Chamomile, a sprig of fresh mint, a spoonful of golden honey. Steam rose slowly from the blue teapot. The comforting fragrance drifted through the cedar cottage while the first rays of sunlight slipped gently through the open windows. Outside, the garden stretched awake. Tiny blue flowers surrounding the old sundial welcomed another peaceful day. Lavender glistened with dew. The moonflowers folded themselves into elegant ivory spirals after their long evening beneath the moon. The sea breeze carried fresh scents of salt, rosemary, and damp stone. Everything felt wonderfully ordinary. Until she noticed the sea. Something about it looked different. Not the color. Not the tide. The water itself seemed brighter. Gentler. The lantern keeper carried her teacup to the cliff overlook. The little boat rested quietly beside the weathered pier. The waves rolled softly toward the shore. Everything appeared exactly as always. Then the first small wave reached the sand. As it curled gently upon the beach, its edge lifted ever so slightly, just enough to resemble a peaceful smile. The wave quietly slipped back into the sea. Another followed. Its curved edge formed the same gentle shape before melting once more into the tide. The lantern keeper tilted her head. She watched carefully. Wave after wave arrived, each one curved upward with the softest, happiest expression. Not dramatically, only enough to make the heart notice. She laughed quietly. The sea has learned to smile. The breeze answered by lifting a few strands of lavender into the air. Far below, tiny silver fish shimmered beneath the clear water. The sunlight danced upon every ripple. The smiling waves continued arriving one after another. Never exactly the same, yet each carried the same quiet contentment. The lantern keeper followed the winding path toward the shore. The weathered steps still held the coolness of the night. Tiny shells sparkled among the smooth stones. The old wooden pier welcomed her with its familiar gentle creak. She sat at the edge, letting her feet rest just above the water. The sea breathed peacefully around the wooden posts. Soon one smiling wave reached the pier. It rose softly against the wood before slipping away again. A tiny shell floated toward her. It was unlike any she had seen before. Perfectly smooth, pale blue with delicate silver lines swirling across its surface. She picked it up carefully. The shell felt pleasantly warm despite the cool morning. Holding it close to her ear, she expected to hear the familiar whisper of the ocean. Instead, she heard quiet laughter. Not loud, not playful, only the peaceful laughter of someone completely content. It sounded remarkably like gentle waves greeting the shore after a long journey. The lantern keeper smiled. "So this is your smile." She placed the little shell in her pocket. Just then, the pearl glass lantern hanging from the little boat reflected a bright ray of morning sunlight. The beam stretched across the calm sea. As it touched the water, hundreds of tiny smiling ripples appeared. Each one curved softly before fading into the next. The entire harbor seemed to brighten. Even the gulls circling overhead glided a little more slowly, as though enjoying the gentle happiness resting upon the sea. The lantern keeper remained at the pier for a long while. She sipped her tea. She listened to the quiet laughter hidden within the waves. She watched sunlight sparkle across smiling water. There was nothing to solve, nothing to understand. Some beautiful things asked only to be noticed. Late in the morning, she returned to the dream library. Sunlight poured through the round skylight, filling the room with warm golden circles. The dream jars glowed softly. The grandfather clock continued its steady rhythm. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The quilt rested upon the reading chair. The midnight blue book waited patiently. The cedar box shimmered. The 3 white feathers lay beside the butterfly petal. The little blue shell seemed to know exactly where it belonged. She placed it gently upon the oak table. For a quiet heartbeat. The shell reflected the sunlight onto the ceiling. The reflection curved into the shape of a gentle smile. Then it became ordinary once more. The lantern keeper laughed softly. "You remembered." The shell remained peacefully still. She climbed to the lantern room. The little brass bell rested quietly above the great crystal lens. The sea stretched endlessly below. Every now and then, another smiling wave reached the shore. She noticed something she had never realized before. The lighthouse beam, even during the day when it rested, curved ever so slightly as it passed through the great crystal lens. Not enough for anyone in a hurry to see, only enough to resemble a smile. Perhaps, she thought, the sea had not learned to smile today. Perhaps it had been quietly practicing all along. She had simply learned how to notice. That thought filled her heart with gentle warmth. Before evening arrived, she opened her leather journal. Carefully dipping her pen into blue ink, she wrote, "Today the sea smiled." She paused, listening to the distant waves below the cliffs. Then she added, "Joy often arrives so quietly that it looks exactly like the ordinary world, until we notice that everything has been smiling all along." She closed the journal. Outside, the lighthouse watched peacefully over the calm coast. The garden swayed gently beneath the afternoon breeze. The little boat rocked beside the pier. The hidden lantern beneath the waves glowed with faithful warmth. And from the horizon to the quiet shore, every gentle wave carried the smallest, kindest smile, reminding every wandering dream that the world itself was quietly delighted they had found their way home. Another peaceful evening settled around the lighthouse. The smiling waves quietly welcomed the fading sun, their soft curves glowing with warm shades of amber and rose. One by one, the day's colors melted into the calm sea until the horizon became a gentle meeting place between water and sky. The lantern keeper stood upon the cottage porch with both hands wrapped around a warm cup of chamomile tea. The quilt sewn from quiet evenings rested comfortably across her shoulders. Its familiar weight felt like the embrace of countless peaceful memories. The garden had grown wonderfully still. The tiny blue flowers around the old sundial folded themselves for the night. Lavender released its soothing fragrance into the cooling air. The moonflowers slowly opened, their ivory petals gathering the first silver light of the rising moon. Far below, the little boat rocked gently beside the weathered pier. The pearl glass lantern hanging from its bow shimmered softly. Even farther beneath the waves, the hidden brass lantern continued its patient glow among smooth stones and sea grass. The lantern keeper smiled. 3 lights. Above, upon the sea, and beneath the sea, each quietly keeping company with the others. She climbed the winding staircase to the lantern room. The great crystal lens welcomed another night. She polished its smooth glass with slow, careful circles until every curve shone like clear morning water. The little brass bell rested peacefully overhead. It had not rung since the sea had smiled that morning. Yet somehow its silence felt full of quiet expectation. Outside, the first wandering dreams appeared beyond the horizon. Tiny silver lights floated gently across the sea. The lighthouse answered with its familiar golden beam. One by one, the dreams turned toward home. The lantern keeper watched until the sky had grown deep velvet blue. Then she descended to the dream library. The room glowed with warm candlelight. The dream jars shimmered softly upon their cedar shelves. The grandfather clock greeted another peaceful hour. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The midnight blue book rested quietly beside the cedar box. The moonlit map remained tied with its silver ribbon. The 3 white feathers, the butterfly petal, and the pale blue seashell rested together upon the oak table. Each carried its own quiet memory. The lantern keeper touched them gently. Moonlight, dawn, clouds, butterflies, smiling waves. Every little wonder had found its place. She smiled. So many gentle stories. At that very moment, the cedar box released a silver thread. Then another. Then another. Usually, only one delicate strand rose toward the skylight. Tonight, dozens appeared. They drifted upward like tiny streams of moonlight. The lantern keeper watched quietly. The silver threads floated through the round skylight and into the night. Curious, she climbed once more to the lantern room. From there, she could see the sky stretching in every direction. The silver threads continued rising. Higher, farther, until they reached the stars themselves. Then something remarkable happened. One by one, the gentle lights she had come to know over so many peaceful days began to answer. The bright evening star shimmered first. Then a tiny dream light far beyond the horizon. The underwater lantern beneath the sea glowed a little warmer. The pearl glass lantern on the little boat brightened softly. The moonflowers seemed to gather more silver into their petals. The little brass bell gave one delicate note. Even the tiny blue flowers sleeping around the sundial released faint golden glimmers beneath their folded petals. Every quiet light responded. Not brightly, not dramatically, only enough to greet the silver threads. The lantern keeper stood very still. The lighthouse itself seemed to breathe. The great crystal lens gathered every gentle glow. Moonlight, starlight, dream light, lantern, light, even the tiny reflections dancing upon the sea. All of them slowly curved toward the lighthouse. Not because they had been called, because they wished to gather. The crystal lens filled with warm golden radiance. Yet the light remained wonderfully soft. It never dazzled. It simply welcomed. Far below, the smiling waves reflected the growing brightness. The sea became a mirror of quiet stars. The hidden underwater lantern answered with calm certainty. The little boat drifted once around the end of the pier before settling peacefully again. The breeze carried the fragrance of lavender, rosemary, cedar, moonflowers, and salt through the open windows. The entire island seemed wrapped in gentle light. Then, for one peaceful heartbeat, everything became perfectly still. No breeze, no wave, no ticking clock, no drifting dream. Silence settled over the lighthouse like the softest blanket. Within that silence, every light shone together, not competing, not brighter than one another, simply belonging. The lantern keeper closed her eyes. She felt warmth upon her face, the warmth of morning sun, the coolness of moonlight, the comfort of candlelight, the quiet welcome of lanterns, the peaceful glow of stars. Every gentle light she had ever known seemed to rest together in one beautiful moment. Then, just as softly, the silence passed. The breeze returned. The sea breathed again. The grandfather clock resumed its patient rhythm. Tick. Tock. The lighthouse lantern continued its slow turning. Nothing appeared different. Yet somehow, everything felt more complete. The lantern keeper descended to the dream library. She opened the midnight blue book. Silver letters slowly appeared upon the waiting page. Every gentle light remembers every other gentle light. She smiled. Another sentence followed. Together they become a dawn that never truly ends. The silver writing shimmered for a few moments, before quietly fading once more. She closed the book. Opening her leather journal, she dipped her pen into blue ink. Carefully she wrote, "Tonight every gentle light gathered." She listened to the quiet waves below the cliffs. Then she added, "No kindness ever shines alone. Every gentle light quietly finds the others until even the darkest night begins to feel like morning." She closed the journal and extinguished the candle. Only moonlight remained inside the library. Outside, the lighthouse continued watching over the peaceful sea. The little boat rested beside the pier. The lantern beneath the waves glowed faithfully. The stars shimmered overhead. And unseen by hurried eyes, countless silver threads continued weaving between every gentle light in the world. Quietly preparing for the dawn that would soon arrive, carrying the warmth of every peaceful story the lighthouse had ever lovingly welcomed. And so, the lighthouse continued shining, not because every dream would become lost, but because every dream deserved to know that somewhere, beyond every horizon, a warm light would always be waiting. The lantern keeper never counted the nights. She never wondered how many dreams had passed through the quiet beam of her lantern. She simply welcomed each one with the same gentle kindness. One peaceful evening at a time. The sea kept breathing its slow, endless rhythm. The waves continued their patient journey to the shore. The moon still rested upon calm waters whenever the night grew especially quiet. The butterflies found new mornings. The rain remembered its beautiful songs. The garden let time bloom gently. The little brass bell waited for another quiet act of kindness. And somewhere beneath the waves, the hidden lantern continued glowing. Unseen by most, yet faithfully lighting the places where even forgotten dreams might wander. Nothing hurried. Nothing was ever truly lost. Everything found its season. Everything found its way home. Perhaps if you ever find yourself awake on a peaceful night, when rain whispers softly against the window, when moonlight stretches across the room, or when you hear the distant rhythm of waves in your imagination, you may remember this lighthouse, not as a place on any map, but as a quiet place inside your own heart. A place where worries slowly become lighter, where hurried thoughts drift away like evening mist, where every breath feels softer than the one before, and where gentle dreams are always welcomed with warmth. Now the stars have climbed high overhead. The lantern turns slowly. The sea whispers its endless lullaby. The garden sleeps beneath silver moonlight. The cottage windows glow with a warm golden light. The old grandfather clock marks another peaceful moment. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The lantern keeper closes the cottage door. The kettle has grown quiet. The tea has grown cool. The books rest peacefully upon their shelves. The quilt waits patiently in the reading chair. Outside, the lighthouse continues its calm, faithful watch over the endless sea. There is nowhere else to go. Nothing left to do. Only the quiet comfort of this peaceful place. So let your thoughts become as light as drifting clouds. Let your breathing follow the gentle rhythm of the waves. Let every muscle soften. Let every worry float gently out to sea. And as the lighthouse sends one final warm beam across the sleeping ocean, may it quietly find you too, guiding you toward the gentlest dreams, toward peaceful rest, toward a calm tomorrow. Good night, dear dreamer. Sleep well. The lighthouse will keep shining until morning.